It's Grant Cameron, and I'm speaking from Canada. Good afternoon to Denmark and everybody, and it's good to be able to talk to you again. The presentation I'm going to do today is actually a very long presentation, but I'm going to just do a little section of it. And I gave it a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles, and it went over fairly well. And it comes from the fact that I was to do an article for the Free Foundation on what they call contact modalities. And this is a screen that shows when I first had my sort of download experience in 2012. I had done a number of lectures on consciousness, and one was in Florida where I met Ray Hernandez, who runs the Free Foundation, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. And it was at that event that Ray and I first talked about consciousness, where he came to his first conference. And then a couple of days later, he's on the Miami freeway and he has a download experience. And in that download experience, he's sort of taken out of his body, and he's sort of shown in visual images, sort of a wheel. And in the middle of the wheel is consciousness. And all around the outside of the wheel, there's spirits and ghosts, near-death experiences, remote viewing, channeling, mystical meditation, UFO contact, shamanic journeys, all this kind of stuff. And it's all linked into the middle with consciousness. And so he was sort of given sort of the idea that he should go out and advance this idea. And so that's when he started the Free Foundation. And basically, I had basically the same sort of message in 2012, which said it's all consciousness, because I had had a UFO sighting in 1975, tried to publish a book, nobody would publish it. And at that point, I just wanted to know, somebody must know what I had seen. And so I was looking all these years for an answer. And basically, in 2012, I was basically sort of gotten this idea in my head that it was all consciousness. And I really didn't know what consciousness meant or anything. But so I was on the same road as Ray. So what you're going to see today is a lecture I've done on contact modalities, which basically means that whether you're talking to an alien or a spirit or a dead person or your higher self or whatever you're talking to, basically the idea is it's all the same thing. There really is no difference. We're parsing it. We're saying, you know, channelers are better than people who had experiences on ship. And people who have had near-death experiences are better than people who have had out-of-body experiences. And we sort of argue and parse all this kind of stuff. But basically, it's all the same sort of thing. And I have, when I was going to do an article on this contact modalities, I started by deciding I would put down all these different types of contact modalities in a list. And I came up with over 70 different things. And basically, they all come down to the same thing. And I'll give you sort of the key to what I think is behind all this stuff. So that's basically how this thing starts. And we're going to go through, I'm going to try to do just a little bit of the basics at the beginning. And then I'm going to try to show you some of the videos that I didn't actually get to show in Los Angeles, some very interesting videos dealing with the power of the mind, not the brain, but the power of the mind, of what people can actually do. So let's go. I call it shutting down the bubble machine. So what I'm going to say at the bottom line of this thing is that what's happening is it's not things turning on in the brain that are causing this to happen. It's turning things off in the brain that allow you to get out of your sort of left brain ego mind and tap into this field. So you can tap into the field. You can pull music, you can pull inventions, you can talk to dead people, you can talk to aliens. But the ability is to shut down what I call the bubble machine in the brain. So you have, you know, whether it's smoke or bubbles or whatever, the brain is causing a lot of noise. It's a very noisy signal, and you can't tap into the signal. If you can shut down this, I call the bubble machine, then you can access a clearer signal and read what's going on. Now, here's, let's see, let me try to shut this here. Two things. Well, we sort of assume that what happens in your mind is, or in your brain is what is the accurate thing. And we know, for example, that the vast majority of the things that your brain is telling you are basically wrong. For example, it wasn't until a couple of years ago, maybe 400 years ago, that people believed the world was round. Before then, everybody believed the world was flat. And that was very evident. Your eyes, everything about you told you that, no, the world is flat. Don't argue with me, it's flat. It's very apparent that it's flat. It wasn't until we actually got more information from outside sources. For example, astronauts flying around the Earth, or people sailing their ship into the ocean and not falling off the edge of the Earth. It wasn't until we got more information that we realized that what the brain was giving us through the eyes was wrong. And we suddenly realized, no, the world is round. And it's the same thing. We used to believe that the sun rotated around the Earth. And that's very evident. Your brain tells you, no, the sun is going around the Earth. And it's not until we had other stuff like telescopes and stuff like this that we started to realize that, no, actually it's the other way around, that the Earth is going around the sun. So this is an example of how the brain has basically showing you the wrong things. A couple more. Ego. We have an ego. We believe that we are a unique individual, that I and Pia and everybody's different. Everybody's a unique thing. They're just floating around in a meaningless time and space. And what we've discovered when we get more information, that the brain has got that wrong as well. The ego is a creation of the brain. And there's a lot of evidence we have now. And one that I would suggest people look at is a TED talk that was done by Jill Bolte Taylor, who was a neuroanatomist at Harvard University, who had a left brain hemorrhage. And when her left brain was shut down with the blood flooding the brain, she suddenly realized that her ego was gone, and that this little voice inside her head, so you have this little voice, she said not only did the voice sort of tone down, it was turned off like a mute button on a TV remote control. It just basically was off. And the entire time that her brain was shut down with, I think was for 6 or 7 weeks, there was no voice in her head. So the ego is a creation of the brain. And we believe this is a real thing. It's actually really going on, that this is reality. And in fact, it is something that's been created by the brain. The same thing we find with psychedelics, that if you take people who have done psychedelics, they will tell you, number one, the ego is crushed, that it's like the ego death, the ego dies, and they suddenly realize that everything is alive and conscious. So the ego is something that the brain is creating. So it's like a bad signal. It's giving us stuff that really isn't true. Stress. Jill Bolte Taylor stated that when she had her left brain hemorrhage, there was no stress. It was completely gone. So stress is something that the brain is sort of creating. It really doesn't really exist. The same thing, we have an idea that everything is solid. We have the idea that the table is solid, and we now realize with more information that the brain is wrong. The brain thinks it's solid, but when you get more information tapped into the system, you realize that it's basically all space. There's almost no matter inside a material object. It's all space, and it's the way it's held together by fields that makes it appear like it's solid, but it's not really solid. We now know that things don't have color. We see color, but there is no such thing as color. It's a frequency of vibration. There really is no color. It's just a frequency which is being interpreted as a color. There is no out there. We have this idea, and this is one of the things that I think that ties into the UFO field, is that we suddenly realize that everything is one. There was Jan Hartson, who's the international director from MUFON, asked Ben Rich in 1993, how did the UFOs get here? How does the propulsion system work? And Ben said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Jan said, well, that means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. And this goes to the concept of oneness, that everything is actually one thing, that there is only sort of like one electron, one of everything, that it's all the same thing, and that there are ideas of this stuff out there really may not be true. That's only a thing that the brain is almost like the flat earth is sort of giving us the impression, but it's not really true. And the next thing is we have the idea that everything is moving, and we now sort of understand that everything is sort of stationary, that your brain is taking snapshot, like maybe whatever, hundreds a second or whatever. And they're putting them together, and it's like a movie film, that everything is stationary, everything is now, and that your brain is creating this sort of illusion of things moving. Time and space, we now know through a lot of stuff that time and space may not exist. These are creations of the human brain. And as I'll show you later on, we now know that if you shut down the temporal and parietal lobes in the brain, these are the two parts of the brain that create time and space. If you shut those two things down in the brain by doing meditation and yoga at the same time, or by very slow drumming and dancing at the same time, you can sort of overload these circuits. They will shut down, and you will suddenly get the idea that there is no time and space. So people will say that's the illusion. And that may be true, but it appears more that the illusion is created by the brain, that you have time and space. And when you shut down the brain parts that are doing that, you suddenly realize what real reality is. And that's the whole concept, is when you shut these sections down, you actually realize what's actually going on. You get more information, and it's not what the brain is telling you. It's something completely different. The fear center, this is the Jib Bolte-Taylor talked about this as well. And this is kind of unique, because people will say, there's fear and you have to deal with fear and it's a real thing. And she stated that when she had her left brain hemorrhage, the entire time that she had the hemorrhage, there was absolutely no concept of fear. It did not exist. And so the question is, does fear actually exist, or is it a creation of the amygdala? And here's a kind of an important one. This goes back, I was just, when I was in Denmark last year in Copenhagen, we went for a tour. Pia can tell you the place I wanted to go was the Niels Bohr Institute. And the reason for that is, one of the concepts that we've got wrong is we have the idea that there was only 5,000 stars. When you take a look in a sort of an area where there's not a lot of light, you can see 5,000 stars. And we used to believe that there was, that's all there was. That's what the brain is telling you. There's only 5,000 stars. And when you get more information, when you get outside information fed in there and start to learn what reality is, you realize that what you're seeing and what the brain is telling you is not what's really true. So here's the Bohr Institute in Copenhagen. And we went there, and I actually wasn't really that interested in the Institute. What I was interested in, if you see on the left side is the Institute. And we went around the left side of the Institute and went through those trees, and you can see that path in the back behind the Institute there. That's what I wanted to see, because I'd written a book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity. And one of the things I had looked at in that was download experiences, where a lot of music comes from. This is this whole idea of tapping into the field, where if you can tap into the field, you have musicians who are getting songs in dreams, they're getting songs spontaneously. You get artists who are able to go into an altered state and do art. You get Nobel Prize winners who will claim that their invention came through sort of a download experience. And here's Albert Einstein had his experience. He talks about the dream of the toboggan going at the speed of light. And he stated that when that's happened, it was like my download experience, where he realized that he had to, it was important. This was not an ordinary dream. And he said, I knew I had to understand that dream. In fact, you could say, and I would say, that my entire career was based on a meditation upon that dream. So basically, his ideas, he was sort of inspired by this dream. So Albert Einstein got his invention through a dream. Niels Bohr, there's two stories that he had two different dreams. One was the sort of the electrons spinning around the Earth like they were attached from strings, and the second one was one where you have the sort of the quantum atom, which the electrons move in these different sort of shells, where they're jumping from shell to shell. And that one, there's a story told that he had a dream of being at the horse track, where they were narrating to him that electrons are moving like horses around a horse track, and they can't step on the white line. They have to move from lane to lane. So there's a second one that came through a dream, but the third one is the one that links into the Bohr Institute, and that was Verner Heisenberg. And these are the three of the major inventions, or the sort of the ideas of the 20th century. And Verner Heisenberg's big idea was the uncertainty principle. And that came to him on that pathway in behind the Bohr Institute. He was talking about, it was the middle of the night. Bohr had gone to Sweden or Switzerland to ski. He was a lecturer at the Institute at the time. He couldn't sleep. He was up in the middle of the night. He was walking in the park, and he saw a guy walking in the dark in the park along the path, and he was going under the light. So he would go under a light. He would be all lit up. Then he would suddenly disappear into the dark, and then he would reappear again under the next light. Then he would disappear into the dark again. And that's where he got the whole idea of the uncertainty principle. That's where it came from on that sort of thing. So this is this idea of the fact that we can tap into this field, and that has been done many times in the past, and it'd be very advantageous to learn how to do this. But first you have to sort of understand how this all sort of fits together. The way we sort of interpret it in our modern world is that inventions come from very smart people. And I refer you to a study by Louis Terman, and these people called themselves the termites. And this was a study that started in 1910. It was the longest longitudinal study ever done. And it was done in California. And it was done with kids who they had picked, these kids with 135, 140 IQs, very, very young before they were teenagers. And what they decided to do is they wanted to track these kids through their entire life. And in the end, they had 1,528 kids who were in this study. And they tracked these kids through their entire life. And one of the key things that they learned was there was no connection whatsoever with creativity. Not one single kid in the study of these smartest kids in California ever won a Nobel Prize. Nobody ever won a Pulitzer Prize. There was no major inventions from any of these people. The best that they had, and there was 26 of these kids who had IQs over 180. The best I saw them record was a world-known psychologist was one of them. There was actually 2 Nobel Prize winners that were actually talked to in this study. One I have their names here. Shockley, who co-invented the transistor, and Alvarez, who worked on nuclear magnetic resonance. And both these guys won Nobel Prizes. They were both interviewed for the study and rejected by the study. So they weren't brought into the study. So they had absolutely nobody who had won a Nobel Prize. So we always have the idea that the people who are the really smart people are the ones who are doing the inventions and the creativity. And one of the key things this thing showed was, no, these people just became ordinary people and just had ordinary jobs, and that there was no correlation with very, very creative people with people who are very, very smart. Now, here's back to this thing with time. And there's 4 different ones with time, but the one I want to show you here, and this is this idea that we believe there is time and space. I never really understood this concept till a couple of months ago. I was in California. I was talking to Barbara Lamb, and Barbara Lamb is one of the key people in the UFO field who regresses people who who believe their experiences have been on board the ship. And Barbara was telling me the story that what she does with experiencers is that when the experiencers on board the ship, say it's their first encounter, they're very, very scared. They don't know what's going on. There's these beings moving around them or whatever. And so Barbara had determined that what she would do is she would try to calm these people down, and rather than just allowing them to sort of freak out in this regression session. So what she would say to them, and she would sort of try to distract them. So she would say to them, they would say, "I'm scared." And she'd say, "So do you know what they're doing to you?" And the person would go, No, I don't know what they're doing to me. And she'd say, "Well, why don't you ask?" And then she said there'd be a long pause, and then the person would say, "Oh, they say they're looking at my kidney. They say I should go to the doctor. Something wrong with my kidney. I should go to the doctor." And then she'd say, "Okay, look on the right-hand side. Who's standing beside you? Describe the being." And she would actually sort of like divert their attention away from the fear of the experience that they're having to look around the ship and describe stuff and stuff like that. The key to this whole thing is the fact that when that event first happened, none of that stuff happened. So what Barbara Lamb has actually done is she's gone back into the past to an event that took place, and she changed the event. Because the first time around, they didn't ask about the kidney. They didn't look around the room. They didn't do any of that kind of stuff. So it's basically, you would think that in the past, events are chiseled into stone. You can't change things that happened in the past. This shows very clearly, because Barbara does it all the time. And I believe I asked Mary Rodwell the same question out of Australia. And I said, have you found this as well? And she said, yes. So you have this situation where you can go into a past event and actually change the event. And the other thing that she talks, so that's the idea of time. And then you have the idea of space. So Barbara was in this conversation with Barbara, and then she said, and I asked Mary Rodwell, and Mary Rodwell says this happens too, that during the regression, she said she would ask the person to ask the alien this, ask him that. And the same thing happened with Chris Bledsoe. During Chris Bledsoe, if you know his experience, the transcript shows that basically he was asking all sorts of questions of the beings. The regression said, ask him this, ask him that. And he was asking questions of the being. And so Barbara Lamb told me that she would be talking to these experiencers, and they would basically say, you know, this is happening, that's happening. All of a sudden, the one person said, oh, they say they want to talk to you. And so then she would start an actual conversation with the being. So this is an event that may have happened 40 years before, and suddenly the being wants to talk to Barbara. And Barbara was telling me the one story, and this had this idea of space when it suddenly made sense to me. She says to the being's talking to her, and I can't remember exactly what the event that Barbara was doing. She was in the garden working in something, whatever, and the being was describing this event that Barbara had. And so Barbara said, oh, so were you there? And the being says to her, no, Barbara, I've never been to your planet. And this is the whole idea. So he starts to look at, well, maybe they're not even here. Maybe they can actually project themselves. They can be in this world, and they're actually in another world, or go back to this oneness concept. It's all one. They don't even have to travel here, that it's all one thing. They can just tap into the field and know exactly what's going on, and because it's all the same thing. So this is this idea, and you will see this in other things. Dolores Cannon talks about this. I have this Mark sighting, this local guy who had 2 sightings, and later when he was talking to, this is a remote viewer, one of the people who worked for one of the top remote viewer guys who had run the U.S. Air Force remote viewing program. She had done a reading for him, and she said, no, that was, he was asking, well, who was in those ships? She said, no, there's nobody in those ships. You sent the ship. You sent the things from the future, from your future self. You sent it to yourself to wake yourself up. So when you start looking at all these kind of stuff, and there's a lot of this evidence, when you start gathering, there's a lot of evidence that shows that it gets pretty weird, that there really may not be any time and space, and that we can move around in past, future lives, and it's all now. Almost like Bashar says when he's asked about time. He always says, look at your watch. What time is it? And the person will say 2:30. And you say, no, it's now. It's always now. There is only now. And this is this whole thing that if you want to understand the UFO phenomena, I think you have to start to understand these kind of things, that there may not be any time and space, and that a lot of the stuff that the brain is telling us is not really true. That the reality, when you can shut these parts of the brain down, then you suddenly pop into the reality. This is a woman, Sev Talk, who her interview will be appearing on my YouTube channel, White House UFO. And I did an interview with her, and she wrote this book, You Have the Right to Talk to Aliens. And this photo was only taken a couple of, maybe a month ago or a month and a half ago. And here's her cat looking at an orb in the corner of the room. And here again, you have sort of the idea that what happens in your brain, you think this is actual reality, you think that this is real. And yet when you look at it, cats, dogs, and all sorts of animals have all sorts of senses. They can pick up stuff that you and I can't pick up. And that just shows you that the brain is very limited in what it can do, and it's giving you a lot of illusion. It's making you think things that really aren't true. And a lot of times animals can see things and hear things that you can't hear, and it doesn't mean because you can't see them and hear them that they don't exist. It just means you have to either get an instrument to pick up these signals, or you have to shut down some part of your brain that's causing the noise. This is the left brain interpreter. I won't go too much into this, but the left brain interpreter is a very important, and neurology almost never talks about it. It's in the left brain, and it is, I maintain, is where the skeptic comes from. what the left brain interpreter is when something happens in your life. So for example, you have a UFO sighting, you go to talk to somebody on the street and you say, I had this UFO sighting, and immediately the person says, it was a plane, it was a balloon, it was, you just saw it, you just imagined it. That's the left brain interpreter talking. What the left brain interpreter is, and it's an actual thing in the left brain, and there's been a lot of study done on this, is that when something becomes inconsistent in your life, when nothing makes sense, where something new comes along, like somebody tells you about a UFO or they saw a spirit or whatever, your world becomes inconsistent. There's sort of like a big hole in your worldview. And what the interpreter's role is to do is to actually fill the hole. So it just makes up something. And so I call it the pathological liar. They call it the interpreter, but it is basically a pathological liar. And it's in your left brain, and it's active all the time. And what it does is it jumps in and it makes excuses for things that are happening that don't make any sense. So now is unlimited meanings. Okay. So basically we have the left brain interpreter. So and they actually did experiments with this to give you an example of how this works with the experiments, because your left side runs, your left brain runs your right side of your body, and your right brain runs the left side of your body. And this is very important. I'm going to show you something in a second to tune into this. But so what they would do is they would have people who had epilepsy. And what they would do in order to stop the epilepsy, they cut what was called the corpus callosum in the middle of the brain, between the two brains. You have two brains, not one. And so they would cut this thing to stop the signals from going back and forth, and they were able to control the epilepsy. But when they did that, then the image coming in the left eye would go to the right brain, and the right brain would get a certain message. And if it went in the right eye, it would go to the left brain. But the two brains couldn't communicate with each other, because that's what the corpus callosum does. It sends signals back and forth between the brains. So the two brains can no longer talk to each other. So they would send a signal in through one eye. They would block the one eye, send a signal in through the other eye. So what they would do is they would send a signal, say, to the right brain through the left eye. And it would be, say, a can of Coke. And they'd say, drink the Coke. And so the right brain, which can't talk, the left brain is where your audio, your voice and your language is in the left brain. So the right brain can't talk. Now you've told the right brain, pick up the Coke and drink it. So it picks up the left hand will pick up the Coke and drink it. Then you say to the person, okay, so why did you drink that Coke? Now you're talking not to the right brain, you're talking to the left brain, because that's where the language center is. But the left brain has no idea that you picked up the Coke. It has no idea why you picked up the Coke. So what the left brain interpreter does is it just makes up an excuse. It just says, oh, I was thirsty. And because it has no idea. And that's what it does. And they did this over and over and over. They would send these signals to the one side of the brain that can't talk. Then they would ask the other side, why did you stand up and walk around? Why do you do this? And every time it would make out an excuse. And every single time it was wrong. It would just make stuff up. And that's where the skeptic, I believe, comes. It's a left rational analytical side of the brain, and it's the skeptic side, and it makes up stuff. And you got to remember with the stuff that I saw on the experiments they did with the left brain interpreter, it's always wrong. And so here you have this situation where this thing, you have to realize this is going on in your brain, and that this is sending you bad signals, which are mixing up your signal to get what is real reality. You think you've got reality and you're not. Now here's an experiment that you can see that's going on with the UFO community right now. They're starting to look at experiencer brains. People who've had experience, and they're starting to look at the brain. And this experiment's being done by Gary Nolan at Stanford and by Kit Green, who used to be with the CIA. And they're doing this imaging of the brain. And Gary Nolan was also involved in the Atacama being, and I won't get too much into that. And he basically had this idea that this being, even though there was one in Russia, had a number of genetic mutations, rare genetic mutations, which made it look like this. But it was actually just a 14-month-old fetus. And I say that a 14-month-old fetus will have these wide gaps in the skull that this thing didn't have. So I have my doubts about whether this thing's a 14-week-old fetus. But what they found was this caudate putamen section of the brain that seemed to have a different, heavier structure, more nerve fibers or fibers in this part of the brain in experiencers. That it was sort of it was involved, and they call it the antenna. And their interpretation was this is where experiencers are making the connection to the others, to the aliens, whatever you want to call them, that the connection is coming through this sort of an antenna thing, and that they believe that it would link back into genes, that genes would cause the structure of the brain, therefore the function, and that the interpretation was that the beings may be mixing around with the genes, and therefore this section of the brain, and that if you could figure it out, you could create a drug which would stop the aliens from messing around with the gene and stop the abduction experience. And this goes to this whole idea, there's evil aliens who are grabbing us against our will and stuff like that. So all that being said, they had this sort of idea that this section is being used. And what I basically say is, yes, that may be the section of the brain that may be lighting up, but it's much more complex than that. And this goes back to the idea that we sort of think that there's different sections of the brain doing certain things, that almost like in the old days, we used to think that bumps on the head, that this bump would indicate that this is part of your personality, and this part of your brain, and that it was all connected. There's certain sections. And what I would maintain is that the brain is working as one, and that it's not just this antenna that is lighting up when people are psychic. There's all sorts of things that are lighting up, different elements, and it's much more complex than one particular thing. And with this one thing where there's more structure, what I would say is the reason that there's more structure there is that it's being used. And we know this from studies, which I'll get into in a minute with meditation and stuff, that the brain is very plastic, that you can actually change the structure of the brain, that the more you use a section of the brain, the more that brain will grow, and that if the section of the brain is not being used very much, then this system is pruned off, that these synapses and stuff are pruned off because they're not being used. So if there's a very heavy structure in the brain, this putamen section, then that means that section is being used. It doesn't mean that it's causing the signal to take place. What I would say from all this stuff I've done on the 75 contact modalities is that the brain is just the idiot in between, that there is actually, the mind is not the brain, the mind is separate, and it's tapping into the brain and is using certain sections of the brain, and this is one of the sections it's using to make contact. This goes back to this phrenology idea that in the old days we used to think that there was just different parts of the head. If you touch the parts of the head that had all these different things of people's personality. Now there's this idea they wanted to do a drug. So my basic bottom line, before we get into the contact modalities, is consciousness is equal to awareness. And people will say, oh, you have to be self-conscious. You got to be, some people were saying, oh, you got to be able to speak a language. And you're just adding stuff on to this thing. Is basically awareness, that if something is aware, then it's conscious. And so by this definition, everything is conscious, that you can go back and you can see even back to the dual slit experiment or stuff like this, where you can see particles, photons and stuff that seem to be aware of when there's an observer there, when there's not an observer there. And everything is conscious. So an electron will have not the same consciousness as you and I, but it's just built on this concept. And that, I think, the more we look at quantum physics and science, the more it's starting to back up the idea that everything is conscious, and that the idea that I'm the only conscious one, that animals aren't conscious, the world is not conscious, therefore I can just use animals however I want, I can just use the world, it's very limited, I'm just going to use up the world, it's just an object, it doesn't have any consciousness, doesn't have any soul. These ideas are starting to fade away, and the more we gather outside material, outside the brain, and realize what's actually going on, we realize that no, everything is basically going to be conscious. Now, this right brain, left brain thing, I think is very important. This is where this comes to this putamen section of the brain, where you say, okay, this is causing it. And I'm saying, no, we know. I mean, it's very, very more complex than that. When I did my book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity, I actually came up with all these different inventions and downloads and stuff like that. And I came to the idea that it was this right brain, left brain thing, that if you can shut down your ego brain, your rational analytical brain, if you can shut this down, you can tap into the field. So you have musicians who are very right-brained, and they can tap into the field. You have artists who are right-brained. You have people who do meditation. You have people who have head injuries. Autistic people who have left brain damage are suddenly able to do these massive mathematical calculations. And so I had the idea, well, I said, it's right brain, left brain. And so I contacted Hal Puthoff, who did the remote viewing program in the 1970s. And I said to Hal, I said, did you guys look at right brain, left brain when you were doing the remote viewing with the psychic spies and stuff? And he just said, read chapter 6 in my book, Mind Reach. And when you look at chapter 6 in the book, it basically shows that, yeah, they had this idea back then. And the idea was that, let me see, hang on. That in the brain, this was actually Hal Puthoff's wife that had picked this up, is that when you look at the stuff that remote viewers get, what you see is very right brain, left brain oriented. For example, a remote viewer will pick up the color of something very, very clearly, the shape, the texture, and these are all right brain things. But when it comes to the left brain stuff, the targeting is not very good. For example, what's the size of the object? What exactly is the object? They can describe it, but then they'll misname it. They'll say it's a swimming pool when actually it's a water treatment plant, where they're misidentifying, because the whole thing is the left brain is being cut out. What you do in the remote viewing program is you shut down the left brain. The right brain taps into the field. It picks up the texture, the color, the shape, and stuff like that. But it's not very good because the left brain is shut off. And that's why when they do remote viewing, that's why they just give you a number. That's why they don't tell you this is a target in Egypt, because everybody's going to immediately guess it's in the pyramid. Once you give it some idea and the left brain starts to guess what it is, the rational analytical brain, it starts guessing what the target is, the experiment is over. You have to shut down the left brain. So that's why they only give the person a number. They don't give them any sort of coordinates or anything, just a number, and they make the left brain sort of get out of the way. And that's when they say to you, when you're doing remote viewing, they say, don't guess. Just tell us what you feel, what you smell, what you taste, all this kind of stuff. Just put down everything and we'll interpret it after as to what it might be, but don't guess once you let the left brain in there. So this is the whole idea, is that this, whether you're psychic or whether you're talking to aliens or dead people or whatever, there is this component that it's not just one little section of the brain that is doing this sort of thing. We always want to go back to the materialistic paradigm that the brain is creating consciousness. And I will absolutely maintain it's the other way around. The brain is being used by the mind to send signals, and almost like a TV receiver. There is no football game in the TV. There's no little soccer players running around. There's no big stadium inside in the TV. The signal is coming from somewhere. The brain is just a sender and a receiver. So again, this is this thing of how many brains there are. Gizenega, who's the father of cognitive neuroscience, said there's a confederation of independent modules working together. And this comes to this whole idea that we say, well, the brain does this, the brain does that. No, the brain is thousands of modules, according to Gizenega, possibly thousands of modules, and they're all working together. And this is this oneness concept. And I maintain this is the number one message of the beings that are here, of anything in that world will give you this oneness message. There's only love, there's only oneness, and the whole idea is that everything has to work together as one. So all the modules, maybe this module is helping to do this part of the thing, whether it's a balance or a visual center or the audio center or something like that, but it's working with all the other sections of the brain. They're all working together as one, even though they're independent modules. That's almost like cells in the human body. So all the cells in the human body all work together to become one for the body to work. And when you have a cell that decides, oh, it's going to be an ego cell, it's going to just divide, it's not going to die, that's called a cancer cell. The way the body works is that all the cells contribute what they can contribute and take only what they need. This is this concept. And it's the same thing in the brain, that all the modules are working together, almost like a beehive. You get this analogy where people are very upset, like aliens on board a ship are it's like a hive. It's a terrible thing. They're all working together. They don't have any personalities. But that is how the brain works. That's how the universe works. We are only a small component in the universe, and we are all linked together in the universe, and we have our piece to do in the universe. We are not independent things floating around in the universe. We're all linked together. We're all tied together as one, almost like like cells in a human body. So this is what you got to remember with the brain. It's much more complex than just one little section of the brain that is doing something. We always want to go back to say, oh, this little section of the brain is making you psychic. This little section of the brain is doing this. And I maintain, no, it's part of the process. Here's an interesting thing when we come to this right brain, left brain thing. This comes from the Aliens in the Scalpel, which is written by Dr. Roger Leir. He was sort of famous for doing the alien implants, taking out the implants in the bodies of 17 people. And he writes, and this is from his book, following are other factors that were found to be significant in Daryl Sims' study of 250 alleged abduction cases. So Roger Leir worked on alien implants, and so did Daryl Sims. All objects were obtained from the left sides of the bodies. A significant number of other cases have been investigated that also showed the suspect objects occurring in the left side of the bodies of the alleged abductees. The key to this thing is, if this is true, if all alien implants are on the left side of the body, they're targeting the right brain. If they wanted to target your rational, analytical left brain, which we think runs the world, they would put the implants on the right side of the body. They are targeting the right brain, the creative female brain. They have no interest in your left rational analytical brain. Otherwise, they put the implants on this side of the body. And that's very significant. If that's true, that all implants are on the left side of the body, it gives you a clear interpretation of what might be going on with alien implants. I maintain that the brain is like a radio, like a battery-operated radio. If you were to take that battery-operated radio to Charles Darwin 150 years ago, Darwin would absolutely maintain that the London Philharmonic Orchestra was inside that radio. And you would say, no, it's not. No, there's no orchestra in the radio. He'd say, no, it's coming out of the radio. The orchestra is inside that radio. And he'd say, you know, that little round thing there with the gray, it's vibrating. Every time that the music comes out, that thing vibrates. It's inside that round thing, which we would call a speaker. And you would never be able to convince him otherwise. He would maintain, because he has no concept of the fact that the signal's coming from outside. And we make the same mistake, I believe, in the modern world, is we say, no, the signal's inside. The voice is inside. Everything that's happening is inside your head. And I say, you know, be careful what you wish for, because if you suddenly had your eyes and your ears, which are your predominant senses that make you think that you're inside your head, if they were on your rear end, then you would actually believe you're living inside you know where. And people get this idea that we are inside our head, and it's the analogy of the radio. It is not that way. Consciousness is being projected somewhere else. There is no TV screen in your head. There's no little speakers inside your head. It's happening somewhere else, and we have to make this illusion. And the other thing is that it's not an off-on switch. It's like it's almost like a thermometer, or like a thermostat, where it's different levels. So when you get people, you're going to get channelers, and you're going to get mediums and mystics and these sort of things. So you, like for example, a channeler, you have relay channelers, then you have trance channelers. It's different levels. It's almost like a thermostat, where some are good, some are really good, and some are really, really good. It's different levels. It doesn't mean that you either have the talent or you don't have the talent. It's how much can you shut off this sort of rational analytical side that's causing the noise in the signal. And the more you can cut off the signal, the more clear the noise, the clearer the signal will become. Ingo Swann, who wrote the remote viewing protocols, said noise equates to inaccuracy. And this is the whole concept, that your brain is very, very noisy. It's giving you all these optical illusions. The world is flat. The sun goes around the world. Everything's flat. It's giving you all these sort of things. It's giving you a lot of bad signals. And when you can shut those signals off. So the whole idea behind contact modalities, if you want to talk to dead people or aliens or whatever, the idea is it's not turning things on, it's shutting things off. When you can shut things off, you can get rid of the noise that the brain is causing and get a clear signal. So back to this thing, I say this idea of having one section of the brain running the whole psychic thing, it's false association. And the analogy that I always use is if you have a fire in Northern California and you have 1,100 firefighters there, and you have a lot of smoke and a lot of heat, it does not mean that the 1,100 forest fires guys, the fighters, or the smoke or the heat created the fire. They are connected. Yes, they are part of this thing, but it doesn't mean that the firefighters started the fire because they happen to be at the fire. This is false association. It's sort of linking something that is part of it, but not the cause of it. Even from sitting, everybody's sitting right now, you have brain patterns. And this was shown on a number of, one particular lecture where they show that your brain is lighting up all the time. And it comes down to this whole idea of who's making you sit. Is the brain making you sit, or are you sitting and making the brain light up in certain ways where the brain is just responding to what you're doing? When it comes to this putamen section, we know for a fact that there was a lot of research that was done back in a decade ago with the parahippocampal gyrus on the right side of the brain. So again, we're talking the right side of the brain, which is the active. You shut down the left side. And when Ingo Swann was in remote viewing tests at Laurentian University here in Canada, they were picking up very clearly that when he was hitting the target, when Ingo Swann would be on site with a prediction or with a psychic hit, when he was on, this parahippocampal gyrus on the right side of the brain was lighting up. Now, it doesn't mean that that's what's causing it. It means that's part of the process. That's the firefighters at the fire, that it's being used as part of this process. And again, it's on the right side of the brain. It's not the left side. It's on the right side of the brain. And what he's doing is he's basically shutting down the left brain and lighting up this right part of the brain, which is picking up the signal and getting the correct target. And if the target, where they found in this experiment, if the person didn't hit the target, so you'd have a control group who was not psychic, then this left interior frontal gyrus would light up when they tried to do the experiment. And so we have these two different aspects that show that all sorts of sections are lighting up. And there's a study that was actually done here. The study's findings are suggestive of an association between telepathy and the right parahippocampal gyrus. So in this modern stuff that was being done at Stanford University with Nolan, with the work they're doing, they have not brought up this right parahippocampal gyrus. Now, it doesn't mean that's gone away. I mean, those results were done 10 years ago, and Kit Green was actually part of that process 10 years ago, where they were going to run an experiment where they're going to put two people in an MRI machine. They were going to send a signal between the two people, like a telepathic signal, and see whether the brains would light up at the same time to see whether the signal was non-local. Now, one of the ideas of the brain thing is you use it or you lose it. So if you're using a part of the brain like this putamen section, if you use it, it's going to get bigger. It's going to be stronger. And if you don't, you lose it. So this is the idea that the brain increases in certain sections and it writes off certain sections or prunes certain sections that aren't. And it's a read and write. So the brain is able to read and to write. It's almost like a cell where it brings in outside signals from the environment, and then it writes the program in the brain to accommodate for that. So you become sensitive to your environment, and that's how you evolve, by this read-write program. Now, I think here's this pruning thing. I'll skip that. Here's the idea that if you don't use it, this is this idea that if you take a mouse at birth and you cut off you block one of the eyes with a blindfold, they will never develop sight in that eye. That it's an input thing that if it's not being used, you will lose that part of the body that's not being used. So it's this read-write and this idea where it programs based upon input coming from the outside. Like a semiconductor, it's almost like the idea where you have muscle cells. So if, say, Pia is just normal and then she starts lifting weights, the signal comes from the outside to the cells in the muscles and says, oh, Pia's lifting weights. We got to get some muscles. And so it will read the environment and will start to make muscle cells, and Pia will get stronger and stronger and stronger. And it doesn't mean that the muscles are just forcing Pia to exercise. Pia is exercising, and the muscles are being built because there's a read-write system that realizes that she has to exercise. The same, or they have to build muscle cells. The same as if you start running, your heart and your lungs will start to create muscle or cells that will accommodate, because you need more cells to provide the energy you need to do jogging or running or exercising or whatever. It's a read-write system. And the same thing happens in the brain, that when parts of the brain are being used. So in this idea with psychic stuff, we can start to learn of what areas to do and how to turn sections off and how to tap into the system. I'm firmly convinced that we can actually now start to teach people how to do this stuff, but you have to understand how the basic system is working. That the brain is a verb. It's not a noun. We call it's an object. It's not. It changes all the time. It's like the human body loses 3 million cells a second. Your body is changing constantly. Your brain is changing. It's cutting off synapses and it's adding neurons. And it's based upon what is coming in, what the environment is telling. It's an actual thing that's changing. And we know from plasticity through different things, like meditation changes the brain. We know a lot of stuff. You can actually change the structure of the brain. So the brain is a living, it's a verb thing. And you have to see everything in the world as a verb. Right now, we look at things as a noun. Everything's an object. It doesn't have a soul. It doesn't have a spirit. These things are just nouns. They're not. They're actually verbs. The entire universe is a growing system. It's alive and it's growing. This comes to this thing that Bruce Lipton talked about with cells, where he would take a stem cell. This is back 50 years ago already, before everybody got into the whole genetic thing. He would take a stem cell, let it reproduce until he had 30,000 stem cells in a petri dish. And then they were all the same, because they all came from they were all the same cell, genetically identical. And then what he would do is he would change the culture medium for the 3 cells, break them into 3 different dishes, change basically the blood for the 3 different, and he would get a bone cell, a muscle cell, and I can't remember the other, a muscle bone, and I can't remember the 3rd cell was, but he'd have 3 different cells would grow in these things, and it was dependent upon what the medium was. If you change the medium, it would be a different cell. And this is this idea that the cells are reacting to the outside environment and doing what they need to do to do it. Now, a lot of people will use this whole idea, and I'm going to sort of skip over this very quickly, is that, oh, it's all just, it's a world with quantum wave potential, and it's quantum foam. The particles are coming in out of the quantum foam. And I say, well, that's fine, but where the quantum foam comes from? And we're just making up stuff. What we do in science is we name things and we make them go away. We just say, oh, that's just a cell dividing. Oh, that's just a holographic universe or stuff. Well, where did this all come from? It's trying to put turn things into objects, and that in a lot of senses we're just sort of making up stuff. And that it goes back to this idea that consciousness is primary to the physical world. Deepak Chopra called it the Chitakash, the unlimited space of consciousness, that is primary. And then you may get quantum wave potentials out of that, or quantum foam, but you can't just start. Almost like the idea where we get to start the universe with the giant miracle. You give me all the quantum wave potential, you give me all the foam, give me all the energy, give me all the mass, and then I'll show you that it's just a random process. But you have to allow me to start with this giant miracle. I get to have all these things to start. You don't get to start You have to explain where do things originally come from, what is the basis of the whole thing. And the more I maintain, the more we look at things now, the more it appears that consciousness is going to be primary and matter is going to be secondary. It's almost like if you talk to people who've had the samadhi experience or an experience of oneness or psychedelics, they will talk about this thing where it's quiet, it's unconditional love, all this kind of stuff, and it's the idea that everything is consciousness and it's very quiet. And then when you sort of like throw a stone into this consciousness, it starts to vibrate. And when you get vibration, you get physical matter, and that physical matter is just sort of a vibration of this consciousness. And that the physical thing is just an aspect of consciousness. Consciousness is primary. They are not two separate things. It's not consciousness and matter. Matter is a derivative of consciousness. If it vibrates, it's illusion. That's one of the things that's in some cultures is talked about, which I think is right. That which is real is that which never changes, which is consciousness, the basic bottom line. And so I say the brain doesn't create consciousness. Consciousness creates the brain. This is a thing I use all the time. This is a meditation device. It's called a Muse device. And what happens with this thing? It was tested on monks, and it basically reads your brain signals. And what it does is, if it's very active, what you're going to hear is a lot of rain coming down. And so when you hear the rain, you go, okay, I got to concentrate on my breath. Let's move, let's stop, let's calm down, concentrate on the breath. And then suddenly it will go neutral. Then suddenly it's very quiet. And as you get into that state, you go very quiet. And then when it becomes calm, then you hear birds. So this device can actually read your brain signals and tell you when you're in this theta, the edge of theta and alpha, where you're trying to get into this signal. And this is the concept that it's not, the brain is telling you to put on the Muse machine and it's making you do all this kind of stuff. You are the one who's putting on the thing, and you are the one that's making the brain meditate. The brain is not making you meditate, and you can actually control it, because it's very clear that when you're in this state, when, for example, you hear the birds and you get excited, suddenly your brain starts to move out of this state. You start thinking about something else, and suddenly the rain comes back. And so it's very, very hard to stay in this state. And you know very clearly when you use a Muse device that you are controlling your brain. You are actually controlling your thought. And when your thought moves off the sort of the mark where it's supposed to be, you can hear the noise that your thought is going someplace else. Here's the parahippocampal oneness experience. The parietal lobe, is on the right side, and these are meditators who will do this with the monks and people who are very good meditators, long-term meditators, and they show this experience where on the right side it's very red, is very active, and they quieten it down, almost like a Muse, where you get the birds coming. And when you shut that down, you get the oneness experience. So the parietal lobe gives you the sense of being in 3D space. And so people say, well, you get the illusion that you're in oneness. It's the other way around. It's when you shut off the illusion that you're in 3D space, then you suddenly realize that you're in this sort of oneness experience, that you're actually shutting off the noise and you're getting a better signal. Meditation, the monks have shown categorically, and the research they've done with them, is that they are able to control their mind at a great ability. And there's been a lot of study done on them. Here's the whole thing with this gamma signal, where you have the brain on the right is very, very active, and you can see with the long-term meditator monks. I think this was in university in Wisconsin where they do this, where it all goes blue. It's very high gamma. It's very hard to hit gamma and then to maintain gamma. These are some of the highest gamma signals ever recorded in the human brain. They're up 80 to 100, and gamma starts at 25, and they're very, very high, and they're able to maintain this, which shows that it is the observer who is actually controlling the brain. It's not the brain is just accidentally doing this sort of signal. You need someone who's done long-term meditation, who's actually able to give signals to the brain, to give instruction to the brain, that the observer is creating the brain. He's making the brain do what it wants to do, not the brain making the observer do things. The big Chandler Bashar, Darryl Anka in California, they wired him up to the machine. They basically showed it's hard to see in the image, but the left side is the regular sort of brain before he channels. You can see it's sort of yellow, and then you see it going into this sort of very quiet sort of gamma, where sections of the brain are being shut down on the right hand side. And when they do channelers, they find that channelers are in this gamma 45 to 50 hertz signal. That it's not that the person's sitting there and pretending to be channeling. They actually are producing a very distinct brain signal. Here's the brain meditation thing, where the structure of the brain is actually changing. And some of these experiments were actually, one was 8 weeks, one was 3 months, where the brain can change that fast. In 8 weeks, you can actually change the structure of the brain by meditating. And so you have, there you have the observer, you have the mind, which is the non-physical aspect, controlling what we think is a physical environment. It's the consciousness is creating the brain, not the other way around. Now I want to get to, here, this goes to the basics thing, where you get a lot of these scientists are now coming along, where they're saying consciousness does not matter. Matter is secondary. Consciousness is primary. Brain does not do consciousness. Consciousness does the brain. There's more and more of these people. John Wheeler, who came up with the idea of the black hole and the wormhole, stated no phenomena is a physical phenomena until it is an observed phenomena, which goes even to the idea it's a participatory universe, that you are helping to manifest what is happening around you. You think that you're sort of an observer, that you're sort of a cork going down a stream, and the more you look at it, the more you suddenly realize that you are controlling what you're seeing. And it even goes to this idea that the concept that physical stuff does not appear until there's an observer, that you cannot have physical stuff until there's an observer who's manifesting that sort of stuff. So the scientific field is moving very much towards this consciousness aspect. Here you have the open science. This is a bunch of scientists who have actually come forward now and actually have signed a sort of a manifesto talking about post-material science, and the fact that they believe that the material is not primary, that consciousness may be primary. And a number of very sort of major scientists who have signed on to this. Okay, now we're going to get into the contact modalities. So you get the idea that you think that contact modalities are things that are just sort of happening. And what I say in the 70 contact modalities, when I put them all down, they all come to the same thing. Every single one of them is connected to dissociation or trauma. So dissociation is the ability to shut yourself off from your ego mind, to dissociate. And when you dissociate, when you shut down this sort of left side of the brain, then you pop into the field. And everything's in the field, as you'll see. All the material's in the field. All the information's in the field. For example, experiencers, when they did the free survey, 42% of all experiencers say they had scientific, technical, or mathematical material in their head they did not learn in school. Now that they got out of the field. Somehow they tapped into the field and they got this material, which they did not learn in school. And some of this is very complex quantum physics stuff, inventions. There's been a bunch of patents done on this kind of stuff. And the other thing that experiencers talked about in terms of this sort of tapping in is that 40% of all experiencers, if you look at the free survey, and this is 6,000 experiencers who filled out these 600 questions, 40% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I talked to a couple of them about this, and I'd say, well, okay, so how long did that last? And they'd say, well, it faded pretty fast, almost like a dream, that within the first day they had forgotten everything that they had learned, but they knew that they knew everything at one point. They knew everything in the universe. And that's the whole idea, that all the information is there, and it's the ability to associate and get in the field. And sometimes it's caused by trauma. So people will, this idea now, it's caused by genes. Oh, it's genes that are making you psychic, whatever. Well, we know for a fact that acquired savants, like Orlando Sorrell, had a head injury, get hit with a baseball, and suddenly he starts speaking in a foreign language. He starts speaking in, I think he was speaking Spanish, where suddenly he'd never spoken Spanish, and suddenly he was basically fluent in Spanish just by getting hit in the head with a baseball. So this is the thing with trauma, that a lot of times trauma is causing the person to dissociate. It's shutting down the left brain, and the person suddenly is able to tap into the field and pick up stuff that they normally wouldn't have. So he was 10 years old. He was knocked unconscious by a baseball. Edgar Cayce, the famous psychic. We think, oh, well, you know, he had some sort of genetic thing or whatever, which may be part of it. But basically, Edgar Cayce started when he was a little boy. He tells the story. He was trying to do his spelling, and his father was very upset. He couldn't spell any of the books in the little speller book that he had. And his father got so upset that he hit him across the head and sent him flying off the chair. And he was lying on the floor. And this voice came into his head, which he called it was an angel. And the angel said to him, "If you rest for a second, we will help you." And so he said, "Daddy, Daddy, let me sleep on my spelling book and I will know all the answers." And so his father allowed him to sleep. He woke up a couple minutes later. And from that time on in his whole life, Edgar Cayce claimed to have the ability to put his head on top of a book and go to sleep. And he would wake up with everything in that book in his head. And he knew every answer in the book. He could spell every word in the book. And the second incident happened when he was playing baseball. He hit with a baseball. That's when he started to be able to channel and say, we have the body. And he would make these readings on the body. We have the body here, do this, do that. So with him, it was 2 trauma events that led to his this ability to be psychic. And to me, it's this trauma thing. It's this shutting down the ego, the rational analytical side that is causing the noise in the signal and allowing you to tap in. Ingo Swann talked about this, the fact that there's noise. And we get into the contact modalities. So the main one that people talk about is meditation. That a lot of times the way you want to tap into the field is you need to learn to meditate. You need to quiet the left side of the brain, not the brain. You need to quiet the left side of the brain. And the EEG research is showing that there's very definite things that are happening in the brain. There are very different brain frequencies that are taking place, and that is actually changing the structure of the brain. Here's this, if you've read the famous book now, this American Cosmic with this guy, Tyler D. Tyler D talked to me in 2013. He talked to me. He had a number of inventions that he had come up with. And the first one that he told me, the most dramatic one, and this is an experiment they put on the space shuttle, that he had to fight to get it on the space shuttle. They said, this is crazy stuff, it wouldn't work. He told me, he said, you know, Grant, the morning I had that idea in my head, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of my bed. And of course I said to him, I said, well, could you see its face? He said, no, I couldn't see its face. So you get this idea that this was not some random thing that his rational analytical brain just sort of put together, analyzed and came up with it. This was something that actually happened to him where he was able to dissociate, and this thing popped in his head, and he's got 40 patents now, has made lots and lots of money from these different patents, and he believes that he can actually tap into the system. And his technique is to sleep. He sleeps 8 hours a night, then he gets up, then he goes back to bed for 1 hour, then he gets up and he goes and sits in the sunlight, and he drinks a large glass of water, and then he can feel that he's tapping into the signal. And that's how he works it. Whereas Whitley Strieber uses a different system. Whitley Strieber and Tyler doesn't drink, and he doesn't drink coffee or alcohol. Whereas Whitley Strieber drinks coffee, and he drinks a little bit of wine in the evening, and he has a shot of hard liquor later in the evening, and he doesn't sleep really at all. He only sleeps for about 4 hours a night. So he's using a completely different, he claims to have a very clear signal. So what I say with all these different techniques are what our Bashar calls permission slips. Whatever you think is going to work, if you find something that works for you, whatever that thing is, and you believe it's going to work, that's what taps you in. It's the belief that taps you into the system. So you can be doing different sort of things. It's not like you have to do this, and find and imitate somebody else's system. You got to find a system that you believe will work, and it works. So that's Tyler's system. The other thing that happened with Tyler D is all this happened right after he was good friends with Judy Resnick, who was on the shuttle that blew up. And he was actually at the launch site when she and the other astronauts launched, and he watched this thing explode. And this was his close friend, died right in front of him. And he actually at that point had a divorce, and he had heart problems. He had all sorts of heart issues. And it was at that point when he had this download experience, which again comes to this trauma thing that we say we want to avoid trauma in our life, but a lot of times the trauma is what gets you. It has this side effect where you tap into this field. Hypnosis, 16 to 20 studies show better results when you're doing ESP experiments. We know this, and hypnosis is the same thing. What it is, it's quieting the left side of the brain. You just quiet the brain down, and the left side and the right side is able to tap into this. Dolores Cannon has a technique that she uses for this sort of thing, where she can actually sort of heal people. She can actually go and pull material. And the other thing that's interesting with hers is that it's real time. So she had the one where she had 12 people who had tapped into Nostradamus. And when she was making these conversations with Nostradamus, she said it was happening in real time. That Nostradamus at certain points would say, I gotta go. My wife's cooking dinner, I gotta go. And he would actually leave the session. So it was almost like Nostradamus was alive again, and she was interacting. There was no time and space. So Dolores Cannon has used a lot with this hypnosis thing. And when John Burroughs from Rendlesham from Forest, when he did his hypnosis, he had this channeling thing started. He started to channel inside this hypnosis. So hypnosis is one of these things that can sort of open up the channel and allow you to get in. Inner vision process, I'll skip that. Yoga, this is an interesting one because what I said before was this thing with the temporal and parietal lobes it was discovered, I think it was the University of Pennsylvania, is that if you do yoga and you do meditation at the same time, and when John Burroughs was talked to by Kate Green, he was told to do one type of yoga and one type of meditation. And the University of Pennsylvania seemed to indicate that if you do both these sort of at the same time, you sort of overload the signal to the temporal and parietal lobes, and they shut down. And that's where you get this sort of samadhi experience, where you become sort of telepathic, and you have the noise completely shut off. Where you're shutting down these systems. Prayer is a contact modality. It's used all the time. If you take a look at Ray Hernandez's original story, 2012, the guy who started the Free Foundation with his dog gets healed, he sees it as a UFO experience. His wife is very clear, and I talked to his wife in Florida when I was there. She does not see her experiences as UFO experiences. She sees them as Jesus and God. This is a very religious experience. She's Roman Catholic, and she sees it completely different. So she was praying all night, and the dog got healed. This is a dog that was totally paralyzed. They were going to euthanize it in a couple of hours, and she was praying, and this dog suddenly revived and lived for a year, totally normal, almost like a puppy for a year. It was like 15 or 16 years old when this incident happened, but she had spent the whole night praying, whereas Ray, when he saw the object, he saw it as a UFO type experience. So basically, you just have different interpretations on this sort of process. The hypnagogic state is very interesting. You have these states just as you're going to sleep and just as you're waking up. You have these periods of time where you're in the field, where the noise is shut down, and you're able to tap in. And one of the key things that a story that was told by Thomas Edison. So Thomas Edison, there's a statue in the United States, and on that statue, you will see on his left hand, he's holding a steel ball. The story behind the steel ball was that Edison claimed that he wouldn't really sleep very much at night, maybe 2 hours a night. So he would sit in his lab, he would sit in a chair with arms on it, and he'd hold this steel ball in his hand. And then he would, as he said, he would just sort of meditate. He would just sit there and let his mind wander. And what would happen, he'd have a steel bowl on the floor below his hand. And what would happen is he would sit there and he would fall asleep. And his hand would relax, the steel ball would fall, and it would hit the steel plate and wake him up. And then he would immediately write down what was in his head. So this is hypnagogic and hippopompic state where you're able to be in that state. So he would go into the state fall asleep, be immediately woken up, and write down what was in his head. And he had 3,000 books, and he had 2,500 inventions or whatever it was. But when they actually do the statue, they actually have this steel ball. That's why they have a steel ball in his hand. That's how he was getting all these different sort of inventions. A lot of them with when you wake up. I've had these. Frankenstein, the story for Frankenstein came there. Gary Nolan talks about this, and he calls it the little elves, where Gary Nolan from Stanford, the guy who's doing the tests on the human brain, says he goes through all these, and a lot of people will use this process. What you do is you get all what you want to solve, you write it down, you put it beside the bed, you get all these things, and you say, okay, I want this solved. You go to sleep, and a lot of people wake up in the morning and the answer will be in their head, or they'll get the answer so within the next day. And Gary Nolan called it the little elves be working at night. So this is this process of going through the work, gathering all the material, analyzing it, forming the questions, and then allowing the left brain to shut down, which is what happens at night. Your left brain goes quiet. That's why you dream, because that's right brain stuff. You're dreaming, and the left brain is out of the way. The noise is cut down, and the mind can actually get the material. And when it comes back into you in the morning, it's almost like a dream. So when you have a dream, when you wake up in the morning, you have a dream that you want to remember. The key is not to move your body. Do not move anything, even move a finger. Because as soon as you move a finger, if you're going to try to remember what that dream was, or what the invention was, or whatever came to you during the night, as soon as you move a finger, start to move, the left brain starts coming back online. It says, oh, Grant's awake, wake up, let's go. And the filter shuts. The filter is open, it's all there, and you have to write down as fast as you can. Get up and write down what's in your head before the filter shuts. Because as the body becomes awake, the left brain comes back online, it shuts down the filter, it creates a lot of noise, and the dream just sort of fades into the dark. So this is this whole process, and that's why I'm saying we're starting to understand how this sort of works. Gansfield experiments, they use this with white noise, and with these ping pong balls, they're able to put these people again. It's to shut this part of the brain, to quiet the noise in the brain. And they've had experiments done with ESP. I've had two. My major download was about 2 years ago, with 24 items, and it will become a book. I'll write it in a book. My main one is walking. So what I'll do is I'll walk maybe 10 miles or more a day, and you just walk, and what you're doing is you're quieting the mind. You're just sort of walking, and then all of a sudden it'll come, almost like zoning out when you're driving on a long trip, where you're just sitting there, you're just driving down a long road, and you zone out. Your left brain sort of becomes quiet, and the filter opens up. You tap into the field, and you will get this experience of something from outside yourself, answers coming to different questions. Daydreaming. This is a very important one. A couple of Nobel Prizes came this way. Again, it's shutting the left brain. The laser and the hologram were both invented this way. And Colin Andrews, first I'll tell Colin Andrews' story. Colin Andrews tells the story, and he's famous for the crop circles. He tells the story where he's having a shower. A lot of intuitive experiences come in the shower. And again, this is quieting the rational analytical brain. You're just sitting meditating in the shower, and he had this experience where he's told, it's time for you to come forward. It's time for you to tell your story. And he said, no, I can't do that. And he knew he was to come forward and say that he is actually an experiencer from the time he was a child. He had UFO experiences with beings and stuff since he was a child. He didn't want to come forward, and he's in the shower, and his voice is there. And he said, the voice didn't have to tell me what I was going to do. I knew exactly what it was telling me to do. And I said, no, I don't think I can do that. And then the voice says, no, timing is everything. I think it's time for you to do it. And then he decided he was going to come forward. And that's why he came forward, is because of this voice came to his head in a period of quiet in the shower. But the big one here is Charles Townes, who invented the laser, actually sitting on a park bench. So what you do is you gather all the material, you do all the analysis, you work through all your problems or whatever, and then you quiet the brain. So he was sitting on a park bench, and suddenly the whole idea of the laser came into his head, and it came instantaneously. And my download experiences, I know how it works, is that it comes with absolute certainty. It's a different thought. You know this is different. You know you got to write this down. You know this is right. You don't have to analyze this. This is how it works. It comes with this absolute certainty. So he was sitting on a park bench, and you can see they've actually turned the park bench into a sort of a statue where this actual event took place. The other one that was the hologram, and that was, again, the guy had done all the work, and he was sitting on a park bench watching people play tennis, and just sat there quietly, and then boom, the idea came in his head. So daydreaming is a big one, and it's the same sort of thing. It's being able to dissociate, shut down the noise in the left side of the brain, and tap into the field. Trance channeling, I mentioned before, this 40 to 50 hertz gamma, and it's indicative of plasticity, that these people are able to hold this pattern. They're able to train the brain to do this. And the farther you get into field, so you have what are called relay channelers. So you're talking to a being and you're relaying the information back and forth. Those people are getting a signal, but it's not as good as a trance channeler. A trance channeler is somebody who's actually will not remember anything when they come out of the trance. Whatever the entity is, the being actually takes over the voice, takes over the body, and we're actually going to do a DNA experiment. We're having some trouble trying to get the final end of it done, but we're doing a DNA experiment which goes into trance channeling, which, if it works, and I think it will work, will revolutionize the world. But a trance channeler is somebody where the person's not even there. They are like basically on the sidelines, and another being comes in. And you'll find this with multiple personality disorders, people who have being abused as children. And what happens is the self splits, and all these alters are created with 20 or 30 or 100 different characters that take on the pain of the child, and the child is moved away, and these alters take over, and then it causes a lot of trouble, but they try to put these alters together. But you'll find these things with multiple personality disorder people, and I've talked to at least one of these people, and that you'll find that they have situations where eye color will change, where one of the alters has cancer and the person doesn't have cancer, or vice versa. One has diabetes and the other one doesn't have diabetes, or one's a female, one's a male, and you have all these various things. Or the one that I talked to, she said that one of her alters speaks Italian. And I said, well, do you speak Italian? She said, no. And I said, does anybody around you speak Italian? She said, no. But she has an alter. When that alter takes over, that alter speaks Italian. There's one American famous case in America. Somebody ended up in jail. It was stealing. One of the alters was stealing. This guy ended up in jail. But one of his alters could speak complete, fluent, and write in Arabic, and write and read in Croatian. And this guy was an American. So you get these bizarre things that show this sort of paranormal ability to tap in. And it's this dissociation process that you're shutting off, you're dissociating. Remote viewers is again dissociating the left brain thing. And one of the things where I'm talking about this idea where it's not just one section of the brain that's involved in psychic stuff. There's all sorts of sections of the brain, and it's being controlled by the mind on the outside. The brain is just the idiot in between. The top 3 remote viewers in the country are all synesthesiasts. So they have synesthesia. They see color with people talking, or with sound. They will actually see colors with numbers and stuff like that. So the top 3 have this synesthesia thing going on. And that shows you that it's not just this one part of the brain. There's all sorts of sections of the brain that are involved in this paranormal abilities. Out-of-body experiences is very clear, where you have the out-of-body experience where the person is totally dissociated. They've left the body, they're out of the body, and this Harabantz, who was, his name is Sean Harabantz, he had the same thing where he was able to go out of the body. He was studied at Laurentian University as well, and he also showed this parahippocampal gyrus thing going on. And the other thing that was shown in these experiments at Laurentian University that shows that it's not just a brain section that's taking place. It's the fact that what they found out is what's called Schumann's resonance. And Schumann's resonance is the sort of the resonance of the Earth, of all the frequencies, and 7.8 7.83 or 7.81, and that Ingo Swann, when he was on target, he was hitting Schumann's resonance. He was in that 7.83 area, and the same thing with Sean Harabanz. And so the guy who was doing the experiment basically believed that all the material was in the field, and when you got the brain to that frequency, that you could tap into the field. And what they did is they created a headband that would produce the 7.8 frequency. And these people, they would give them targets. It would sit people, and they actually had these students, and they were very accurate at getting psychic, where one would be sitting in a room and the other one, they'd flash a light, and the person in the other room would know exactly when that person in the other room was seeing the light. So they were doing this thing where they were actually tapping in. And because I'm going to sort of cut this off, so if there's some questions, but the other one that took place is there's a technique called Bankston healing. And I was trained for Bankston healing. And so healing comes into this as well. People who are able to heal. 40% of all experiencers claim they can heal people. 50% of all experiencers claim they were healed by the others, by the phenomena, by something happening in their experience. So you have, when the Bankston method thing came, and what the Bankston method is, when I saw it, the reason I wanted to be trained is because I said, oh, they're shutting down the left brain. The way the Bankston method claims it can cure any type of cancer as long as you haven't had chemotherapy or radiation. It claims it can cure that type of cancer. And what Bankston said is what they're trying to do is get the healer out of the way. The technique was taught to him by a psychic who was able to heal people, who was able to look at a person and actually determine what's wrong with that person just by looking at them. And there's actually a number of UFO experiencer people who can do the same thing. I know a girl who can do this, where she can just take a look at your picture and she can tell you exactly what's wrong with your body. So the guy who the technique was named after is William Bankston, who is actually the president of the Society for Scientific Exploration in the United States, that works on all sorts of studies and peer-reviewed stuff on paranormal phenomena. He's actually the guy who came up with the technique. So what they do is what you do is you take 20 ego images. Now, they don't call them ego, but they are ego images. You can't have an image where I want to save the world or I want to do something nice. It's all ego images. So what you do is you take an image, you say, okay, I want a new car and it's going to be blue and it's going to have this on it, this, and I want a new house and it's going to look like this, and it's going to have 3 bedrooms, and it's going to have a mountain in the background, and you sort of image all these ego images. And then what you do is you memorize the 20 images, and then you learn to go faster and faster, and you flip these images in your head faster, and they teach you to put them on a wheel, and then you spin the wheel very fast. And the claim is that they can teach you to do 1,000, 2,000 images a second in your head, and you're flipping these images. And I was trained for it, and so I know you can move these images very, very fast. It's just the way they train you to do it. And what you're doing with this thing is you are shutting down the left brain. The ego is very interested. Your left brain is going, oh, look, whoa, look at this motorhome. Oh, look at the house. And basically what you're doing is you're sending the ego out for coffee. You're distracting it with these images by flipping these images, and you get the healer, the ego out of the way, and then the energy is able to flow through. So when this training took place, I went to Chicago to be trained for this. And every single healer who learns to do this process of shutting down the left brain through these rapid image seconds, it motivates the right brain. So the healing is coming through the right brain, the left brain is out of the way, the healer is out of the way, and it comes through, and the heat comes out of the left hand. So the right brain is what's doing it. It's tapping into the field and whatever, and it's coming through the left hand, which is connected to your right brain. And I was absolutely floored when I went to the training session after the course, and this heat started to come out of my left hand. I was just fascinated by this whole thing. And this concept, if you shut it down, get the healer out of the way, the energy can flow through. And what they discovered when they did the brain research on this was that Bankston was going into a Schumann's resonance, the same as Ingo Swann, the same as Sean Harabanz. He was going into a Schumann's resonance, but he was going into a triple harmonic. So he was 7.83, 15 point whatever, and 22. He was hitting this triple Schumann's resonance in his brain, and they were picking this up and they were recording it. And what they found out was that the person that he was healing at one point for a couple of seconds during the healing, the person that was being healed his brain would go into exactly the same frequency, would match the two brain frequencies at one point, would be exactly the same with this triple harmonic of Schumann's resonance. And that's when they believed the healing would take place. At that moment, when the two brains linked up, and that's when the energy would move. The other thing that we know from the research done by Sean Harabantz was this guy who was able to read people. He could sit in front of you and he could tell you everything about yourself. What they found out when they wired those people and they checked their brains was exactly the same thing. That Sean Harabantz's brain was in this Schumann's resonance, and that the brain of the person who was being read by Sean Harabantz would also go into this Schumann's resonance. They would link up and the brain patterns would be exactly the same. So this is what you see when you start looking at these different modalities. And here we have dreams. Here's okay. Let me give you an example of the dream thing. I'm going to show you a couple of videos and then I'll stop. Okay, the first one I want to do is people think the inventions are coming by people who are doing rational analytical thought. One of the key inventions of the 20th century was the invention of Google search. Here is the guy who invented Google telling you where Google came from. And you're going to see this whole idea. It came from a dream. It came from when his left brain was shut down and his right brain was tapped into the field, and he got the idea for Google. And here he is at a lecture, at a commencement, and he's talking about this.
I have a story about following dreams. Or maybe, more accurately, it's a story about finding a path to make those dreams real. You know what it's like to wake up in the middle of the night with a vivid dream? And you know how if you don't have a pencil and pad by the bed, it will be completely gone by the next morning. I had one of those dreams when I was 23. When I suddenly woke up, I was thinking, what if we could download the whole web and just keep the links? And I grabbed a pen and started writing. Sometimes it's important to wake up and stop dreaming. I spent the middle of that night scribbling out the details and convincing myself it would work. Soon after, I told my advisor, Terry Winograd, it would take a couple of weeks for me to download the web. He nodded knowingly, fully aware it would take much longer, but wise enough not to tell me.
Okay, psychics, I'm going to quickly go through these. Psychics, mediumship, same thing. It's dissociating. This DID, I was talking about these split personalities. Psychedelics. Most people say when you take these high dose psychedelics, the ego is crushed, that's left brain, and you suddenly realize that everything is alive and conscious. That's right brain. That's the samadhi experience of the parietal lobe being shut down. Chanting, automatic writing, it's the same thing. There's some who are good, some are even better at it. It's the ability to dissociate. It's used by the Mission Rama people who have these portal experiences where I was linked to them. Francis Swan, who was advising the Canadian government, was using this process. The Canadian government was actually tracking everything that she was saying. Wilbur Smith, if the guy around the Canadian government program, and his wife were doing automatic writing. Breathing, they found that out through LSD. When people were coming out of LSD, that they would do this rapid breathing thing to try to stay in the trance. And so they just did the rapid breathing, and they could reproduce the LSD experience without doing the LSD. They could do it just through breathing. So you can use breathing, telepathy. This is a video. Is the audio coming through on that other video? Can someone give me a signal whether it's coming through? Because this,
the one with the Google, the audio came through. Yes.
Okay, good. Because I want to. There's a couple more videos. I want to make sure you're getting the audio. This is an incredible one. This is you have people, and I did this in my book, Inspired, where you have these savants, and savants, most of them have left brain damage. You'll see they can't talk. This girl here is from the United Arab Emirates. She's not able to talk. She has to use a little pad to punch out words and stuff like that. Will flip out. These autistic children will flip out. Anything gets changed in the room, they just absolutely can't handle any sort of change. She was like basically totally telepathic, this girl. Now, the problem is there's no money to research these kids. There's a bunch of these kids around, and the left brain is basically almost shut down, and the right brain is going at 100 miles an hour. And they're able to do mathematical calculations. They're able to do all these weird things. So I'm going to show you a couple of these to show you what happens, how amazing it is if you can actually completely shut the left brain down, what you can do. So this girl was totally telepathic. The other one I'm going to show you a video now is from Diana Hennessy Powell, and she works with these autistic children. And she had one called Haley. I'm going to show you a video here of Haley. She's at the time, she was 11 years old. And the way they discovered that she was telepathic was that one of her sort of people that takes care of her during the day, one of the nurses that took care of her, she suddenly got the impression that Haley was reading her mind. So she said to her, she said, "How do you say I love you in German?" And Haley went on her little punch pad and she punched in the German words as to I love you in German. And this woman was just floored. So they started to go and they went to Diana Hennessy Powell, and Diana Hennessy Powell started to work with this girl. Now, the video I'm going to show you here is Diane was trying to raise money to do a study of this girl, and she wasn't able to raise the money. And that's the problem in the UFO community and in the parapsychology world, is that people like it. It's interesting stories. Everybody likes to hear the stories. But when it comes down to actually putting up money and researching this stuff, there really isn't that much support. So Diane was not able to get any money to research this girl. But this girl was famous for hitting 162 numbers in a row right. So they would give her these numbers. I'm going to show you, I think, an 18-digit segment that she does on camera. And she would do all these. And then at the end of 162, Diane said, "You've got 7 wrong." And Haley immediately started to punch in the numbers again. And the second time she got them all right. So this is basically pure telepathy. And if we can learn to do this, and if we can study these kids, we can learn what's going on. I'm saying the left brain is shut down. The signal is completely clear. She's picking a complete clear signal. There's no noise in her signal. And so here, what you're going to see on the screen, they have to build a dividing wall between her and the handler. So you're going to see the handler on the right-hand side, who is moving this board across this divider to her. To try to get this, and it took them a long time because she got upset about this divider being there, and then finally calmed her down. So here's the video of her doing a mathematical calculation that her handler is looking at it on a pad, and Haley is punching into this key punch thing. She can't speak. She's punching into this key punch thing, and then there's a little tiny screen where she puts it into she punches it into a little screen. So here's a girl, left brain completely shut down, doing telepathy.
The people that would be most likely to exhibit it would be nonverbal autistic children. And it turns out that I might be right. The video you're looking at shows the experimental setup we had last spring. Haley, a 10-year-old severely autistic child, and her therapist are seated alone in the room, together at a table and separated by a tall partition that prevents eye-to-eye or physical contact. Cards with randomized numbers, words, sentences, pictures, and equations were hidden until the experiment. The therapist viewed them one by one on her side of the visual barrier, and then asked Haley what she was thinking or looking at. Haley pointed with her wooden pencil inside characters on stencils with her right hand to select them, and then entered them with her left to a device that converts text to speech. You'll notice that there are no characters for division signs, equal signs, or decimal points, so the therapist had to tell Haley when these occurred. You'll also notice that her answer is 100% accurate on 18 out of 18 digits. This is just one of 10 equations that she did in a 10-minute period, with accuracy above 90% each time.
Okay, this is rapid image cycling. I want to get to one more video and then I'm going to shut it down. But koans is one I just suddenly realized. This is this idea that in the Eastern traditions where you give the left brain a bizarre problem. What's the sound of one hand clapping? These are called koans. And so the Eastern traditions use this to shut the left brain down. It gives the left brain some stupid problem to work on, and the egoic mind sort of, or what Dolores Cannon used to call Mr. Stupid, goes to sleep. Frequencies are used: music, drumming, binaural beats. Putting in one frequency in one ear, another frequency in the other ear will cause this dissociation. Forced disassociation, abuse and trauma, very common. There's a study done with Brazilian mediums where vast majority of them had childhood abuse issues. So they're trying to shut out the physical world as children. They're being abused, and they disassociate, and suddenly they're talking to their dead grandmother. These are the Brazilian mediums. Epilepsy, I think it was one of the top parapsychologists, his name is escaping me right now, Stanley Krippner, stated that he had almost every shaman he'd ever met in his life had an epilepsy. So this is the idea that you have this epilepsy thing, and the brain is sort of allowing you to tap into this field. Synesthesia, alien abduction. One of the things I'm starting to think now, 39% of all people who've been on board the ship will talk about the screen. They're showing this horrible screen image of the world being destroyed, of floods, all this kind of stuff. And I always ask them, why do you think they're showing you the screen? And they say, I think they're testing my my emotions. And I think the aliens know about emotions. They don't need to test you for emotions. I think one of the things they may be doing with this screen is giving you a message, number one, that we're destroying the world, and number two, they're helping you to dissociate. It's like a trauma thing where they're forcing the person to dissociate, and that makes them more psychic, because there's a huge percentage of experiencers who've been on board the ship who are psychic. They're healers. They have these abilities, and you only get these abilities, I maintain, by dissociation. So the aliens may be doing this kind of dissociation thing. Fever, the whole thing with the survival of the fittest. Darwin grabbed it, plagiarized it, ran off with it, but it was actually Wallace who came up with the idea of the survival of the fittest, and he got it during a fever in 1858, and wrote a letter to Darwin, and Darwin took the idea and ran with it. But the idea came during a fever. Pain is a lot of people. Pain is used. People who have that, fasting, vegetarianism, lack of sleep will cause dissociation, sensory deprivation, brain injury. That's Haley, or people, Edgar Casey, people in Vietnam. The guys who they had looking for the mines were people that had injuries. Brain disease, injuries. Peter Hurkos, one of the top psychics of all time, fell off a ladder, became very psychic. Blind Tom was a brain where he was born with a brain disability. He was one of these sort of savants. He was maybe one of the two mega savants, and his favorite feat is, I always quote this, his favorite feat, he was able to play Yankee Doodle in B flat with his right hand, play Fisherman's hornpipe in C with his left hand, while singing early in the morning, and do all three at the same time. So you see these savants have these unbelievable abilities. Here's the one I want to show you, and this shows again the right brain, left brain thing. This is dissociation. I believe these are what are called the Sachs twins. They're from the 1960s. They're brothers. These were boys who were able to do. Savants have a bizarre love of prime numbers, and these guys were able to do 15 and 16 digit prime numbers. One would give one, and then the next one give what's the next prime number, and they'd go back and forth. And at that time, there was not even an algorithm for a computer to figure out prime numbers that were that big. And these kids so they couldn't even check whether these kids were actually given the correct prime numbers. But here you're going to see a video of these two kids, and give you the backstory on this whole thing. The left brain is what does basic calculation. The right brain, so you get a lot of these savants are able to do massive mathematical calculations in their head. And you're going to see these kids, most savant people have this obsession with calendar calculating. So you're going to see they're going to give them these dates in the future, and they're able to tell you exactly what date of the week is. So you immediately imagine that these kids are calculating, that they have some sort of process in their head that they're figuring out mathematically what date that's going to be. So then you're going to see that they're going to actually go and they're going to ask them some basic mathematical questions. And what you see is the left brain is completely shut down. The left brain cannot answer a basic mathematical question. And yet the right brain is picking up all this stuff, has total memorization of anything that's happened. And it shows the ability, if you can shut down. And again, these are autistic kids. They have language problems, problems of buttoning their shirts and stuff like that. So here's them doing this calendar calculating, and then you're going to see where they go into this left brain thing and they start asking them basic questions about calculating.
It's July 19th, the year 92,000. July 92,000? 860. Here it is. 92,860. That would be 92,860. July 19th? Right, July 19th. That will be on July 18th, 92,840.60. Yeah. That will be on a Monday. On a Monday. All right. Now, July 19th, the year 132,470. Figure this one out. July 19th, that will be on a Saturday. Saturday. All right. Now, I want to ask you some other questions. Yeah. How many days in a year? 365. Is it more than 365 or exactly 365? And leap year 366. 366. Leap year. All right. How many days in a week? 307. How many months in a year? 12. How many hours in a day? 24. How many minutes in an hour? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. How many seconds in a minute? 10 seconds. 10 seconds. Sure it's not more than 10? I'm sure. Sure. All right. How much is 4 times 7? 4 times 7, I don't know. You don't know? No, but there's 4. Mom, McBride taught you for months. Remember when McBride taught you? Yeah. What day was that he taught you on? That's in 1964. 64. What month? In February. What ward? Ward 5. Right. Now, 4 times 7 is how much? It's 21. 21. Couldn't be more? Couldn't be more.
So there you see that they're not able. Here's a Daniel Tammet. He's a savant. He does calculations. He's able to sort of elaborate what's happening in his brain more than these other kids are. So what he says is when he gets a calculation, he's got synesthesia. So he sees everything as colors and shapes. So he gets 53. He knows what the shape of 53 is. He knows what the shape of 131 is. And he says that when he puts the 2 numbers in his head, he just sits and waits for the shape in between to appear. And the shape in between, he knows what the number is. And the shape will tell him what the answer is. He does no calculation, whatever. He just sits and waits for the shape to appear in his head and knows what number that shape is. And here's what it looks in colors. He's describing the colors of these different numbers. That's the way he sees it in his head. The biggest mega savant of all times was the guy who did the Rain Man, Kim Peek. 12,000 books he memorized. He could tell you what was on every single page, and totally memorized 12,000 books. And he had no Corpus Callosum. He had a lot of problems, but his brain was totally at work. He was able to do this. This would be my last video. He was able to do, if you saw the Rain Man, he did the thing with the toothpicks. And it was actually done in real life. It was actually matchsticks. But this is a story in the Rain Man, the show where she drops the toothpicks and he's able to go 80, 82, 82, 82, 246. He's able to, as the toothpicks hit the floor, he can tell you how many toothpicks there are. Now, to show you that we can actually now control this sort of thing, this is done in Australia. What they do is they magnetically stimulate the left side of the brain. So what they do is they're shutting down the left side of the brain. And what they want to do is recreate savant abilities, these abilities to do prime numbers, to do calendar calculation, all this kind of stuff. And what they do is the idea with the matchstick. So what they do, you're going to see on the video here, is they show this person how many dots are on the screen. They show it for 1 second, and it may have 100 dots or 150 dots on the screen. And you are to say within 1 second how many dots are on the screen. So they magnetically stimulate the brain for 15 minutes, and then they do it again. And it's completely, these guys are able to basically tell you how many dots are on the screen, and all they're doing is they're shutting down the left brain. So here's this video.
Right. Again, I'm going to show you, as before, a number of dots on the screen, and I want you just have a moment to look at them, and I want you to tell me how many you see.
When he first tried to count the dots, Mike seemed hesitant. But after a dose of magnetic stimulation, his responses are more confident.
103. 110. 62.
Okay, so before the transcranial magnetic stimulation, you got 2 out of 20, which is very typical. That's about what most people get. But in your case, quite astonishingly, after TMS, you got 8 out of 20, which is better than our average.
Death is a very traumatic incident. I did a study before I got into UFOs on dying people in hospitals. You look there, you see life review. A lot of people report life reviews. Gene Houston, who's famous for being the spiritual advisor to Hillary Clinton, there's a claim at the time, ran the Foundation for the Mind Research in New York, Human Potential Movement. She describes her enlightening experience as jumping out of a plane at 17 years old with a parachute, and the parachute didn't open, and she immediately entered a serenity, found myself in a life review, and basically like a near-death experience. Next thing she realized, she was on the ground, the parachute had opened, but there was just basically the fear and the trauma of suddenly realizing your parachute's not opening, and she goes into this life review. So it's a trauma thing. Near-death experiences. Joe McMonagle, one of the top remote viewers of all times, has a near-death experience, and that's when he becomes psychic. And you'll see this over and over again. People who have near-death experiences or become mediums, they'll have a traumatic operation, or they'll have a near-death experience, and they suddenly become psychic. Flatline, that means the near-death experience. People will say your brain is creating your experiences, but when you have a lot of these near-death experiences, there's a flat line, EG, and basically the person is saying the experience is more real than the real world. It's actually a more real experience, which shows that the reality is outside, that all the bubbles are gone, all the smoke is gone, you're getting a clear signal. And people who have near-death experiences, or people who have lucid dreams, or people who do psychedelics will tell you the experience was more real than the real world. This world we live in is the dream. That's what they will tell you. Near-death experiences, terminal lucidity, where people who have Alzheimer's, haven't spoken for years, will have this period of 5 minutes, an hour, whatever, where they suddenly become totally lucid. Their brain is completely gone, eaten away by Alzheimer's, and they will suddenly become totally lucid. They remember everything, they can talk to everybody, and then within a few minutes or hours, they die. Pre-death visions, my father had one of these before he died. And this is this trauma thing, death predictions I found in my study in the 1970s. Lots of people will tell you that when they're in the hospital, they could actually tell a doctor, today is the day I'm going to die. And they're usually right. Clock stopping, there's lots of incidents of clock stopping when people die. Seances, so I'm going to go through the last one. Seances, hypnotic regression is a modality. Face-to-face, aliens meet with us. Contact modality would actually meet with us face-to-face. You have ghosts. You have shamanism as a contact modality where people are able to go into the field. Pre-birth memories, the Moody Blues, remember before they were born that they were going to be on Earth, they were going to put messages in the music. Newton regressions, life between life stuff. sightings. This is what I say a lot of what UFO stuff is. It's just a contact modality. They're not really flying anywhere. The reason they have lights on the craft is they want you to see them. It's a contact modality. They're just flying around so you can see them. The religious phenomena is the same thing. Crop circles, the reason they're putting down crop circles is a contact modality. They're contacting us. They're giving us messages. Synchronicities is a contact modality. Apports, I maintain all the metal stuff that you're seeing now, all these different pieces of metal. I will maintain that they are being dropped off by the aliens just to get across a message. They're going to be very bizarre, but they really aren't part of ships. They're more like apports. A lot of people use radio, phone. This has been used in the past to make contact with aliens. So the aliens are using that as a contact modality. Infrared, the stuff at the Skinwalker Ranch, that's when they saw the portal was through infrared. They picked up the infrared. And again, it's just more information than the brain is giving you. The brain is telling you there's nothing there, but when you use an infrared camera or something, it gives you something. It shows you, no, your brain is not right. There's actually something there. Television, Colin Andrews had this very bizarre experience with the TV where it shuts down. Millions of people in Great Britain are watching this signal of an alien for about 6 minutes talk on the TV. That happened. Colin taped that whole thing. Tools, and this is where I'll sort of end it. A lot of what you'll see of people are using are tools through contact modalities. All they are is tools. So this octopus thing people put on the head that creates this Schumann's resonance thing. Ouija boards, that's a tool. It's like a permission slip. You have these ones, and I had one actually with a producer out of Toronto who told me just a bizarre story where they'd built this sort of a Ouija board for alien stuff. And she told this bizarre story of this being talking to her and knowing her name is Teza, but the alien said, I want to talk to Nanteza. And nobody in the room knew who it was. And she said, that's me. And this being was talking to her through this sort of like an Ouija board they built for aliens. But it's just a contact modality. It's not really doing anything. It's your belief or your ability to sort of dissociate. And you're using this tool to help you dissociate. Brain stimulation, I showed you before. Spirit boxes are used to make this contact. Tape recorders, people use to pick up spirit communications. Dowsing is a tool that's used. Sigils, magic sigils are used. Crystal balls, tarot cards, tea leaves, coffee grounds, animal bones, oil, black mirrors, blood. All this stuff is all the same thing. It's just a tool that people are using. These things where you can talk to dead people. Mental projections, Philip the Ghost, where they actually created a ghost in Toronto. All these sort of things. Now, possible explanations, we'll leave that for a future lecture or whatever, but I basically maintain that we all have the ability to tap into the field. And the more we learn and watch the people who are in the field and people who are having the contact modalities, we see certain patterns that show us exactly what is happening. And I say it's going to be either dissociation or trauma that is allowing the person to dissociate. So the beings, the spirits, they live in that field. They can come into this field because they don't have this left brain problem. They can come into the world, they can materialize, they can talk to us, whatever, they can go back into the other world. Our problem is we think that we only live in this physical world. There is no world out there. The world is out there. We are living in a dream here. So I'm going to leave it at that. And if anybody has a question or whatever, or if you want to shut it down, we'll leave it at that. That's the sort of the latest research I'm doing. And I think this actually leads to the answer of what's actually going on. Why the beings are here, what messages they're leaving us, and what we can learn from people who are interacting with the phenomena. You can never learn anything about what UFOs are about by watching stuff fly around in the sky, by looking at metal. The only way you're going to learn what's actually going on is to talk to the people who are interacting with the phenomena. And those people are using contact modalities, different contact modalities to make that contact. Thanks.
Thank you, Grant. It's been extremely interesting. I know a couple of people here, they have questions. I'm just going to ask you about the DNA things. When you were in California, you were going to speak with I think JC Knight and Shaw, and one person more about getting a test done on their DNA. Have you been able to do that?
Well, J.Z. Knight did it. That's where I got the idea. J.Z. Knight did it. And what J.Z. Knight did is she had the DNA because she was under a lot of attack that she was a hoaxer and she was doing whatever. And so they did a lot of brain stuff to look at her brain and stuff like that. And the person she channels is this Ramtha. And Ramtha said and this is the idea where consciousness creates the brain, not the other way around. So he said the mind is the DNA. That is, the mind creates the DNA, creates the body. And when you change the person, so this is this idea with channelers. You have relay channelers where, say, Pia, you're channeling, you're still in control. If you're just relaying a message back and forth, but if you suddenly get a spirit that actually takes over your body and your voice changes and everything changes, your mannerism changes, then Pia is sitting in the back seat of the car and this other being is now driving. And what Ramtha said is the DNA will change. So what she did is an experiment. J.Z. Knight, who was the sort of a spiritual advisor to Shirley MacLaine, the actress, they did her DNA when she was normal, and then they did her DNA when she was channeling Ramtha. When she was normal, and this went to 3 different labs, they did 3 different tests. So when she was normal, the DNA showed that she was French. When Ramtha came through, when they did the DNA, when Ramtha was channeling, it showed that she was North American Indian and I think Icelandic. So the DNA completely changed. And that's where I got the idea. And I said, all we have to do is duplicate this experiment. Either J.Z. Knight made this thing up, or we can run this thing again. All we need is a trans-channeler, somebody who's able to completely dissociate, completely shut off their conscious mind and let the other being take over. So we started looking for people. Nobody really wanted to do the experiment. And I actually looked even at these multiple personality disorder people, because it's the same thing. There's the claims with multiple personality disorder that the eye color is changing, that the medical conditions are changing, all this kind of stuff. That's DNA changing. It gives the indication that when an alter comes in on a multiple personality, that the DNA is going to be completely different. It's going to be whatever the personality is. So what we tried to do, and I had sort of given up, and then we got an agreement with Bashar, or Dale Anka, who channels Bashar, to do the test. Now we're sort of at a standstill. The assistant was going to do it, but there's been some sort of stall. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to do it through 2 different labs. And what we're going to do is try to duplicate that experiment where when he's Daryl Anka, when he's normal, it should have 1 DNA. When he channels Bashar, the DNA should change. And if that turns out to be true, the whole world changes, because then you really have to consider the brain really doesn't have anything to do with this at all. It is the mind that is controlling the DNA. The mind's controlling everything. That's this whole idea that you manifest what's around you. The John Wheeler thing. There's no physical event until there's an observer. That it's a participatory universe, that your mind is controlling what's going on, or even the idea that this whole thing's a dream created by your mind, and that when you die, you actually wake up from your dream and you're back in the real world.
John Burroughs spoke on a show you did about his DNA being very special, and even stating that his son didn't have any DNA. Do you think his experience with the Rendlesham case has changed his DNA, or do you think?
Well, no, his DNA will be the same. What I said to John, I told John I was going to do this experiment. He never really got back to me. He said, "Well, I want to know," and I've never really told him. But I did leave him a hint. I said, "John, next time you're getting regressed, have a DNA kit near you," and that it was just a hint to say when he channels, then that DNA may change, because then the other being is talking through him. So whoever is running the session, who's ever doing the talking, it's their DNA. So you even have a situation where, for example, Pia, you could have a situation where you look at the potential of this. So say if your father has died or your mother's died, if you have some of their DNA, if you can actually get a trans-channeler to contact your mother or father, and they're trans-channeling your mother or father, the DNA of that channeler should be your father or mother. And if you can confirm that kind of stuff, if you've got your father's DNA or a DNA sample, and it comes through. So John's DNA will be, as long as his consciousness is running the show, as long as he's normal, his DNA will always be the same. What I maintain is that when he starts to channel or dissociates, that's when the DNA will change. If there's another being that comes in and takes over John's body, and that's what happened is supposedly when he was doing that regression, he started this channeling thing, and that's
I understand that, but the test that was done on him, I believe through Hal Puthoff, was it him or
Nolan? Yeah,
yeah. They stated that he had a very, very abnormal DNA.
a very unique DNA. Yeah. But then you have to look at the idea, Pia, that if it's one life, then it's one world. But if it's multiple lives, so John could have chosen to come in with that DNA. So whatever your DNA is, if it's a multiple life thing and your mind is running the show, so he may have a very unique DNA. I don't know what they meant by that. They didn't sort of define that. Or his son doesn't have anything. The thing is that I maintain that if you keep taking his DNA, it will always be the same. It's only when the trans-channeling thing starts that the DNA should change. That's the big thing, is because what they're saying now is you're a victim of your DNA, Pia. That your DNA.
They did ask him to meditate and do yoga before he had this test done. Yes.
No, they asked him to do that all the time to make contact. And I said to John, I said, did the contact increase after they told you to do this? And he said, yeah, it works. And that's what I'm saying. And so they must know this dissociation, because that's the thing with the University of Pennsylvania, that if you do yoga and meditation together, it shuts down the temporal and parietal lobes, which pops you into the field. And so that's what they were telling him, is to do this meditation thing. So he does one in the morning and does one in the evening. And he says it helps. So this is like they're teaching him a contact modality, which indicates to me they must know these contact modality thing. Why would they tell him to do these two bizarre meditation and yoga thing? It wasn't until I saw the thing from the University of Pennsylvania where they were saying the same thing, that if you do these two things, one's an active and one's a meditative thing, like a stationary thing, one's active. And what they state is when you do them both at the same time, then it overloads the circuit and this part of the brain shuts down and you get this samadhi, this oneness experience. So that's where they were telling him. They had done the experiment with him. They just got his DNA. Actually, they got the DNA during his test. Like during the operation, he had that when he was too close to the UFO. And I maintain he pulled his gun. That was the thing. He pulled his gun when this thing lit up on the field, and then he had this heart injury. And he's doing when they got his heart operation. Kit Green got him a disability, and he had the heart operation. That's when they got the DNA. And it was only when the DNA came back, that's when they said, you have this unique DNA, very unique DNA, and your son doesn't have any traces or whatever. And that's when they told him to do the meditation. And so he does this meditation and this yoga thing, which opens up the channel. That's why I said, does it work? And so it indicates they know something about this. Maybe they've been told this, or they figured this out from experiencers, that this does open up the channel. It's a contact modality that they're teaching them to do.
Okay. I'm just going to comment on something you said about Mary Rodwell. I had a regression with Mary Rodwell, and yes, it was in real time, if you can say that, everything I experienced there, and she did kind of make it possible to ask these questions to the beings I saw in my regression. So she does use that technique.
Yeah, that's kind of unique to me. I didn't understand until Mary was telling me the story, and then suddenly it hit me, because you always hear this story. There's no time and space, the Einstein, with moving the speed of light and the time slows down and all this kind of stuff. And I never really understood the concept. It wasn't until she told me that concept where I'm thinking, whoa, you changed the event. It just sort of occurred. And I've been doing this like for 44 years. I didn't realize this idea that you can actually prove that you can change time. You can go back into a past event and actually change that event. And if you can do it in that, maybe the aliens can actually do it in everything else as well, that there is only here and now, and that we have it's the illusions that are sort of throwing us off. We think there's past, present, and future. And the idea we're getting, it's all one. There's only one now, and that you can change the past and the future. There's even a psychologist. Her name is escaping me. She's got a PhD from Columbia, who actually talked about the fact that she claims that she can actually have a meeting with her past, present, and future lives in a meeting, and have a discussion with all her different lives, all talking with each other. It's just that kind of bizarre stuff makes more sense when you hear what happened to you, or what Barbara Lamb told me, where you suddenly realize, oh, she changed the event, where it's not a stationary event chiseled in stone. You can actually go back and ask questions in your event and talk to the aliens and ask them questions and stuff like that. It's bizarre. I never picked it up until just a couple of months ago.
I'm going to ask a question from Steve, who's here at the moment. And this doesn't have a lot to do with what we're speaking about today, but this is a question for you about how do you feel that Trump, his position on this whole topic, and maybe especially now where the To the Stars Academy has just put a person on their advisory board called Chris Herndon, I believe his name is, and he was the chief information officer at the White House, overseeing this the secure communications for the executive branch. What's your take on where Trump is in all of this at the moment?
Okay, I posted a little bit about it because, as I mentioned, one of the top Republican fundraisers, just when he was elected, came to me to help brief him that they didn't think he was going to get told the truth, and they wanted me to tell them all this sort of stuff. And I said, well, I don't know the bodies, I don't know the crafts, I don't know anything. I really can't help you. And he's got to know. I maintain, a lot of people maintain the president doesn't know. I maintain the president has to know what's going on. Because, you know, if you're dealing with a foreign power, the head of state has to negotiate. You can't have, some person down low level in the government dealing with aliens. You have to have the head of state, and he's the head of the executive branch. He's the head of intelligence. He's the head of the military. I mean, he has to know what's going on. So I always maintained they knew what was going on. And what I told this guy who wanted to do this briefing thing for him was, well, he's going to hire the CIA. He's going to hire the NSA. He's going to hire all these different people. And if they don't tell him what's going on, well, that's his own problem. I mean, if his own people aren't going to tell him what's going on, because it's the idea that everybody quits in the government, like the Obama government, everybody quits, everybody resigns, and they leave. It's not like there's anybody there to keep the secrets. Trump replaces everybody. And so what I believe has happened with him, he stated in one statement before when he was running, he really wasn't interested in UFOs. He wasn't really interested in outer space. But you now see that he's brought up the whole space force thing, where he wants the space force, and that kind of scares me a little bit, because I'm always fighting against people in the UFO community who believe that there's evil aliens here and they're going to eat us or do whatever. And I don't believe I don't believe any evil alien stuff. And so it's the idea that he's seeing as a threat. So it would indicate to me that he was briefed on the thing, and how he's reacted to it is to build a space force. That we're going to go to war with these aliens. And I maintain that with John Burroughs, where he pulls his gun, or with all the crashes in the 1950s, where planes were, pilots are being killed for trying to shoot down UFOs, that if you decide you're going to try to go to war with the aliens, you're in a lot of trouble. I mean, that's pretty stupid stuff. To assume that they're evil, that's my fear, is that we're going to try to turn this into, we're going to build this huge space force, and we're going to try to kill aliens, and it's just not going to work, because they may be a million years ahead of us, and it's just an attitude problem. And you see this, my fear with To the Stars, the same thing. We're calling it a threat, that we need to fight aliens, that there's these evil aliens that are messing with our DNA, and they're here and they're bad stuff. And I maintain that we have met the enemy, and he is us. We are the enemy. They are not the enemy. We are the ones that are dropping atomic bombs. And I say, if you believe in evil aliens, I say the minute they drop an atomic bomb, I'll believe they're evil. Until then, the Americans hold that reputation of killing 100,000+ people with atomic bombs. The aliens, as far as I know, haven't done anything like that. They haven't killed massive numbers of people. I think we're the problem.
Okay, thanks. Perhaps Sim would like to ask the question. I know he has a question for you.
Okay. Go ahead, Sim.
Mr. Cameron, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, good to talk to you again.
Yeah. Are you aware of a contactee called Suzanne Kanzler?
Yes, yes.
Well,
I had a bizarre, I'll tell you a really weird story with Suzanne Chancellor. Suzanne Chancellor had an experience where she was on board the ship and they showed her a 3D holographic image of a formula. And she said it was so big and it was like 3D holographic. She was able to actually walk around inside this formula. And they told her, they indicated that it was a cure to cancer. And she started to, they said, something you use every day. And she said, well, is it like toothpaste? And they said, well, sort of, but they wouldn't tell her. And then, so she had that experience. And then there's a guy by the name of Brett Oldham. And Brett Oldham had an experience where he encounters the tall grays on board a ship. And he's very upset with them. And he says to the tall alien, he says, let me ask you a question. What's your concept of God? And the tall alien says, we are one with the one who is all. And he said he was so profound, he had to sit down. He couldn't believe it. That they talked about this oneness thing, that everything is one, that we are working with the one who is all. And he said at that moment, this 3D holographic image of a formula started to appear coming out of the wall. And they told him, this is the cure to cancer. And he said, well, give me a pen. I got to write this down. And they said, no, you can't. You can't write it down. You got to remember it. He said, I can't remember it. Give me a pen. No, you can't have a pen. You got to remember it. And he was getting all upset. He got so upset that they actually took him out of the room. The thing was that both of them had been shown this giant 3D holographic image of a formula and was told it was a cure to cancer. So I actually offered to put up the money for both of these two people to be regressed. And I was going to bring in Yvonne Smith to do the regression. And I was going for the formula. And I said to Yvonne, if someone sees a formula in their on board the ship, can you reproduce it? She said, that's one of the best things we can do under regression. We can get them to reproduce the formula that they saw. And so I made the agreement. And in the end, they sort of got very sort of worried about other stuff that would come up. And I basically said, well, I don't really care about all the other stuff. I'm going for the formula. I'm paying for this. We're going to regress you and we're going to go straight to the formula. And if you want to ask some other questions, that's fine. I don't really care about anything else. I just want the formula. So it never did come. But you see these weird things where people are shown stuff on board a ship that turns out to be actually helping us. Another example is, if you know Susie Hansen. Susie Hansen and a guy in Canada, it was a band where the entire band was abducted. His name is Steve Boucher, were both shown an instrument that the aliens used, which had placed a green light on the person's arm, and you could actually see the veins in the arm with this light. And then they could change the sort of the intensity of the light. You could see the bones, then you could see the muscles. And they actually used this thing on his stomach to look inside his stomach with this light. Both Susie Hansen and Steve Boucher described exactly the same object, the same thing that was used on them. So you see this kind of stuff on board. So that's my little story about Suzanne Chancellor, about one of these.
Exactly the same phrase that I was wanting to talk about, because I thought it was Suzanne Kanzler who got that answer. We are all part of one that is all.
Yeah, no, that was Brett Oldham. Brett Oldham. But they both had the same experience of seeing this giant 3D holographic image coming out of the wall.
Yeah. I have another question. Yeah. That producer that you had a guest sometimes, Chris?
Oh yeah, Chris from Hollywood.
I saw him. I know now who is Chris Peters. Are you aware of that?
Yes. He's been identified now. Yeah, he's been identified as Chris Peters. Yeah.
That's it. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Marcelo has a question for you.
Okay.
Yes, hi Grant.
Hi, Marcelo.
Fantastic lecture. Great lecture.
Thanks.
Beautiful stuff. It's quite interesting what you're saying about the yoga done with meditation. I've been doing yoga with meditation for 19 plus years now.
Wow.
And I've been trying to tell people, look, and I teach it in every single class that I teach. Look, here's like something really powerful. And people sometimes get overwhelmed, they get scared. The whole fear thing is quite strong in the programming of basic humanity, right?
Yeah.
So,
you're right.
Right. And so I just wanted to know quickly, what happened to Jill Boulter Taylor after she came out of her left, her left brain thing?
Yeah, she had, well, the left brain was shutting down, and she would talk about the fact that during the event, it's actually, I think it's the second most watched TED Talk of all time. So you can look up Jill Bolte Taylor.
I've seen it, but I'm asking about what happened after 6 weeks.
Well,
Her
what happens is
came back?
the left brain started coming back online. So the swelling would go down, the blood clot was taken out, the swelling would go down, and the left brain would start to come back online. And that's when she said, suddenly she said, the voice was back. Like there was no voice. She suddenly realized there was suddenly this voice was back in her head, and it was saying you're bad, you're having problems, and the voice is very negative. It's sort of like a very negative sort of thing. And that's when she said to the voice, she said, "Oh, I was very happy without you here," and the fear came back and the stress came back, and then she said that's when she made this thing. She said to the voice, she said, "Okay, from 9 o'clock in the morning till 9:30 in the morning." And from 9 o'clock at night till 9:30 at night, you can bitch and complain all you want, but the rest of the time you are to be quiet. And she maintains you can actually control the voice in your head. It's just everybody thinks that voice is supposed to be there, but she claims because she knew the voice wasn't there, that she claims she can control this voice to only speak when she wants it to speak. And another person that claims that is like Deepak Chopra claims, they live in the moment, where the voice is not controlling it. And people think that voice is an actual real thing, that it's you talking. And yet when Joe Bolte Taylor talks about it, where it's cut out, you realize that voice doesn't have to be there and you can actually control it. And that's the whole process, whether it's through meditation or whatever, that you can actually start to control these things that you think are uncontrollable.
Exactly. And that's what the ancient Asian traditions were pointing at. That's the Enlightenment tradition right there. There is the voice in the head is the prison of the mind, as Morpheus said to Neo.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. And so it seems to me, like all these contact experiences are basically these higher dimensional beings or aliens, with super intelligence or super high technology, super high abilities. They're basically trying to help humanity become more conscious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we're at that point where we're sort of getting.
Right. And that it seems like humanity is deeply unconscious.
Yeah, in some ways we're going the opposite way. I mean, we're becoming more separated. It's like America first, me versus you, good guys versus bad guys, and the separation. And that's maybe what the message they're trying to get us is if you believe in separation, you're dead in the water. You are not going anywhere. You're going to destroy the world. You have to understand that we are all like cells in a body, that we have to work together, almost like Deepak Chopra says. You have to realize that the air is your breath. The trees are your lungs. The water is your circulation system. Unless you come to that conclusion and realize you are connected to everything around you, you are going to destroy the world.
Right. And it seems like it all started with scientific materialism, with Newton and all that.
Yeah. Yeah. And because they've created cell phones, that's why they have all the power. And it's sort of like, you and I can talk about this stuff that's very important. And they're going to go, well, you haven't created a cell phone. Everybody's interested in the toys, and you get caught up in the material paradigm and in the toys, and it's like rape, pillage, kill, and steal. Who's ever got the most toys when they die wins. And that's the mentality that everybody's working, because everybody likes the little toys and the cars and stuff like that.
Right. So Grant, Mike, I've got another question about I was at a birthday party 2 weekends ago, and there's a little girl who was attending. She was 11 years old. And I was watching her for the whole 5 or 6 hour event. She was on her phone playing games constantly. She was not there. She was turned into a zombie, right?
Yeah.
So what about 5G as well? What have you heard about 5G? Because it seems like all these things are about turning humanity, human beings who have these incredible quantum computer brains with incredible potentials, just like those high level monks who were studied by Richard Davidson. I finished reading that book recently, the Altered Traits book.
Yeah.
But it seems like all these things are to turn people into zombies, and the contact experiences are about the opposite, about waking up. What have you heard with 5G with that?
Well, I think I look at it. You have that problem that people are turning off, but you also have the thing where it's almost like the collective unconscious. Like even in research, where you basically when you tap in, it's like the idea that 40% of all experiencers say the answer to everything was there when they were in the experience, and they sort of forgot it. And the benefit to me of this sort of internet thing is that everybody's linking all their material into one common place where you can tap into this material. I think in some ways it's a positive thing, almost like the aliens have given us the internet to understand what collective unconscious is, and that the separation is becoming less because you can't really hide anything and all the answers are there. It's almost like the idea where if you and I want to get our message out, we can get the message out. We have as much power as the New York Times. We just have to get it onto the internet. It's not like in the old days where you had no voice. You can tap into the system, almost like this idea of the Google coming in a dream, where we're sort of given this idea, and our power comes from us working together. Where you have the brain that has a certain capacity that you are able to get to a certain point. But the only way you can advance now as a society is that all the people in the society have to join together to work as one to increase it, because your brain capacity is only so much. But if you put all those brains together on the internet, but it's like anything else, like water. You can use it for good or evil. You can use metal for good or evil. Everything has a component where it's going to go one way or the other. And to me, it always comes down to the idea of separation versus oneness. Anything that's evil to me is the belief in separation. If you believe that you are separate, if your internet tells you that I'm going to use this for good, for getting answers, for putting out a message, whatever, then it's for good. But if you use it for, like kids linking themselves off, then you can use it for bad. Everything can be used either way. Everything in the universe is neutral. There's no good people, bad people. There's no good or bad aliens. There's just souls that are reincarnating. Everything is neutral. Everything is our creation, our manifesting. You can manifest good things in the spirit world and the good in this world, and it's all a matter of creation. The universe to me is neutral.
Okay, and the last question I have is, you mentioned about psychedelics and heroic doses. That terminology, I think it's from Terence McKenna. Yeah. And is it spreading around the world, the heroic dose thing, because I one time took Iboga, and Iboga, and I think I told you about it, and the whole experience lasted 25 hours, and that was a mega heroic dose. It lasted 25 hours. And my wife said she had never seen me without an ego before. And it just crushed the ego. It was like, and it was so powerful, but it's like, that is waking up people around the world as well to the whole control paradigm that's keeping humanity enslaved.
Yeah, and that may be where like Eastern religions, or where religion comes from, is this sort of enlightenment that some guy was walking along and they picked up a mushroom and ate the mushroom and suddenly popped into this other world, and that's where these ideas come from. And because of the Cartesian thing where we separate materialism and spiritual, and the material takes over, we sort of have said that stuff doesn't exist, and that's where more and more when we tap into these things. When I put all the contact modalities and I say, if you have the heroic dose for the psychedelics, you have the experience, you suddenly realize, oh no, I'm on the wrong path. And it'll always come down to experience. You really can't, I think in some ways, can't really convince anybody. It's not until you have a sort of a samadhi experience where you're in that world where you suddenly, it's like me with my UFO experience, where you go like, oh, now I know what's going on. It's like, it's where experience teaches you rather than trying to teach people. And so the more people that do it, and it's a process. If life goes on forever, if things are eternal, it really doesn't matter where you destroy the world. It really doesn't matter what really happens. It comes down to you and I. If reincarnation is a fact, if things are eternal, we came into this world to do something, we're going to leave, we're going to get asked how did it work out, because you planned it, you set up the whole thing, and how did it work out? And it comes down to an individual thing, it's a personal path, and that you have to have empathy for the people on the path who don't know what's going on, and then realize the fact that to whom much is given, much is expected. Knowledge not used is sin. That if you and I have the knowledge and if we don't use it for good, then what good does it, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? It's an individual experience that everybody's on their little path, and that you and I, because we have so much more knowledge, are much more responsible for what we know, that nobody's going to cut us a break when we die and say, we're going to say, well, Hillary Clinton and her emails, or Donald Trump, or my mother-in-law, the dog ate my homework, or make all these excuses. They're going to go, no, you knew what it was all about. And it's up to us to take what knowledge we have and to do what we can with that knowledge, and then have empathy for people who don't have the knowledge and who aren't on the path.
Yes. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Christian, so he'll be on in a moment.
Okay.
Hello, Grant.
Hello.
I have a question. There seem to be about 2 billion galaxies discovered right now. And if we are making up things in our minds, how is the universe or the galaxy created by us through looking at the universe? Because when I was into computer gaming and making computer games, we had this in the late 90s, that we created the world when you proceed in the game. So you can have a much bigger game than was made before the character was entered the game.
Yeah. That's the whole concept of us manifesting the world, that we are sort of creating the world that we see, and I think it's 2 trillion galaxies, which is another thing that people don't realize, is that you take a look at people who we say are very smart, like Einstein, Niels Bohr, or Heisenberg, when they were alive, when this famous thing took place, the conference, the Soviet conference, where they came up with this idea where the observer effect and all this kind of stuff, they only believed there was one galaxy. Einstein, all these guys believed there was only one galaxy. Now I think it's 2 trillion galaxies, where it gets bigger and bigger. And if you get to the Eastern idea, it's the idea that it's all one mind, and it's a matter of creation and expression, and that the universe just keeps getting more complex and more and bigger, and that you and I are participatory in that creation, that you can create whatever you want, and you're helping the universe to evolve.
I had another question. When through time, people have seen every sort of crafts, like airships, saucers, red light like you. Is that a part of the conscious of people, where in the state where the mind is in the period of time, if you know what I mean?
The way I see sightings as part of like a contact modality, that you get to a certain sort of evolution of consciousness, and other consciousness starts to interact with you, or other beings start to interact. I think with the reason that so many different types of crafts is because it really has nothing to do with the craft. It's not like there's 1,000 different ships. I think a lot of it is our seeing what we want to see. That you can get 2 people sitting beside each other who see 2 different things. That it's more of I call it, the theory I used for it was called the theory of wow. That they just want you to go wow. They want you to think and go, what was that object like? And they're making you think like, oh, maybe there's more to the world than the physical world that I'm thinking. And then suddenly they have the crop circle is even more dramatic. It's like, what are they doing with the crop circle? What is the message? Like, who's leaving the message? And all they're trying to do is get you to go, wow. You're going like, wow, what's going on? And none of it means anything. It's all just signaling to you to wake you up, to realize something's going on. And then you tap into the people who are interacting with the phenomena. And that's the way it works. I think a lot of the sighting stuff, because when I saw my second sighting, I still remember looking at it and saying, what are they doing? Because they were just sort of flying along and they didn't seem to be going anywhere or doing anything. And it wasn't until years later I suddenly realized, like, no, they weren't doing anything. They were just there because they wanted me there. They wanted me to see it. And maybe there was no ship there. Maybe it was, I made it like myself, like my friend, where this psychic tells him, no, you sent the ship. I mean, it was you that woke yourself up. And you start to see this interconnectedness of time and space and yourself. And the ships may not be anything. They may be, you know, just something that we create, because it's like the John Lennon one where he has the big light bulbs on the side of the ship. I mean, if you're flying through space, you don't need big light bulbs to fly through interstellar space. I mean, all the lights are different. It's something just to make you, to wake you up, just to realize something's going on. That to me is the whole sighting thing. And that's why, because we don't have lights on our planes except for landing lights, you know, for navigation purposes or, you know, safety stuff. We don't have lights on our ship. Why have they got lights on their ship? They have lights so you can see them. They want you to see the ship. Yeah. That's the whole idea.
Great. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Then this is Pia again. Then what is the purpose of healing people? Like, these beings, they heal something like 40% of the people in the study, of the free study, I believe you said.
Okay. Okay. That could be part of the thing where it's like a wake up thing where people are being sort of given a message. But one of the things I've read about healing now is that people actually heal themselves, that a healer actually doesn't heal you. The healer just that gets a field. They produce a field where if you tap into the field, it's your belief that actually heals you. And that goes into this Bankston thing, this thing where you see the healer and the person who's being healed go into this synchronistic wave pattern where they both have the same, exact same brain pattern of waves. So and that makes sense to me, that the healer produces a field, and it's your belief, almost like Jesus said, you know, is your faith that has made you whole, or it's your faith that healed you. There's no magical sort of magic going through the air where the healer's making people. You're part of the process in this whole thing. But again, part of it may be the thing where they're just trying to wake people up in terms of allowing people to, like, force them to dissociate. You show them the screen or you do whatever, because these people are being taught how to heal. I mean, they're not natural healers. But
they're also getting healed themselves from the aliens or the orbs. There are also a lot of cases where they get healed.
Yeah. And Chris Bledsoe talked about that, where he had chronic Crohn's disease. But is it him healing himself? Like if there's no time and space, if you are a creator, it's almost like a reincarnation is a fact. If you come in, for example, they had the thing about 37% of all people who are experiencers had near-death experiences. So you have this traumatic near-death experience, and they're also experiencers that have been on board the ship. And so they wanted to have they wanted to do a sort of a study, like how can this possibly be? And I say, because you're making the wrong assumption. You're assuming that the person, this is a random event. It's only one life and it's a random event. So you say, well, how is it possible that somebody could have a random near-death experience and then a random event on board the ship? But if reincarnation is a fact, maybe you chose to have an experience, and maybe you chose to have a near-death experience to learn something. So the whole healing thing is that when you are sick, you look at it the other way in multiple life thing is, why would I allow myself to get sick? Did I plan this before I was born, that I'm going to be sick or I'm going to die as a child or at 20 years old? You hear the Newton stories, Dr. Michael Newton. I always encourage people to read that, The Journey of Souls. And in there, he talks about these people who are gathering together to be a part of like a plane crash or a ship going down or something, where they're all agreeing that they are going to die in this thing. And it's the whole idea that your life is planned for you, and you decide exactly when you're going to come in and when you're going to leave and who your parents are and that sort of thing. So it's not a random thing that you are sick. Maybe you are sick for a reason, and it's a life lesson. And that because you make yourself sick, you can also cure yourself if that's part of what the plan is that you wanted. And that a lot of it becomes a lot less random than we think. We think we're just like corks that are sort of going down a stream, and there's all these things there. Your genetics is messing with you, and aliens are messing with you, and your mother-in-law's making you have a bad attitude or whatever. And in the end, it's an internal thing that you are creating what's around you. And all the stuff that's around you may be stuff that you picked to be around you. You chose the stuff. Almost like people complain about, oh, this is a horrible time or whatever. And I always remind people, whatever you think is bad in the world, just remember, you chose to be here at this time and in this place and in this situation. Maybe you chose to be in this terrible time because you're supposed to do something about it.
Okay, and perhaps the orbs or the aliens are creating this wave pattern so people can heal themselves.
Or the other thing is that John Alexander said, what if it's true that we are them and they are us? What if you are actually the aliens? What if you are actually one? What if you, your life before was one of those beings? You have a lot of people who will say, I don't believe I'm from here. I believe, like John Denver, the 53 million albums, the famous singer in America believed he was from the constellation of Lyra. So you have this whole idea that maybe you are the aliens. And it's this idea of separation. If you realize that you are one with the aliens, then how can you kill aliens? If you believe that you're one with the Mexicans, the Chinese, or the Russians, or everybody in the world, if we're all one, how can you go steal people's stuff? And that's sort of the concepts that we always go back to separation, and we go back to the physical world, and we fall back into these illusions of things that when you look at the brain, they aren't true. That we can prove they're not true, that we're getting illusions of what's actually going on around us and making false assumptions. And that was my download experience, which I will do a book on. It was 24 things that came to me that said, okay, what you got to do is you got to look at the assumptions. And it's like a mathematical equation. Pia, in step number 1, if you add instead of subtracting, you can do all the calculations you want. You are never going to get it right, because in step number 1, you made the wrong step. So you have to assume, you have to say, is it a world made of nuts and bolts? If it is, that's one world. But if it's a world made out of consciousness, everything changes. Is it one life? If it is, that's one world. But if it's multiple worlds, that's a whole different world. If it's a random world, that's one world. But if it's not a random world, if it's a self-organizing world, that's a completely different world. And you have to rethink. So it's all these false assumptions. And I was given 24 things. Is you making this assumption, it's wrong. It's this, it's not that. It's this, it's not that. And it's these kind of things about random world, conscious world, good versus evil. Is there good and evil? Is there time and space? All these we make these false assumptions. And then because we make the false assumptions, we make false conclusions from starting off and adding instead of subtracting.
Okay, that's interesting. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on to this. Is there anything you want to round up?
No, that's good. I'm going to head off and volunteer now, and I appreciate my time in Denmark. I need to know where my stick is, but other than that, I mean, I really appreciate all you've done for me. And anytime you want to do a presentation, or if you want me to come on with somebody else, I know most of the people in the field, and this is a kind of a good way to do it. I even said that, in some ways you could actually do this, because I used to do my meetings on Zoom as well, where you'd have a meeting once a month. You'd bring in some speaker, and then I would have my speaker in Canada, and then you'd have all these groups around the world, and you could actually have a schedule from around the world where, you see who Denmark's got tonight? They got, Mary Rodwell. Oh, let's go watch their meeting. And you could actually have these meetings, and that's the power of the internet, that we can actually get together around the world, interact with each other, and you could have 1,000 different meetings going every month with researchers and groups around the world, that you could tap in to all this different knowledge that all these people have. And that's the power of the internet, that we're able to interact, and we are actually able to become one. Rather than separate entities, we can get together, we can share ideas. And when we share ideas, that's when the power goes beyond our own little brain, that we get together and we can hopefully save the world from the way it seems to be spiraling into this sort of separation world, where it's me versus you and good versus bad and that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate your giving me a chance to interact and to talk again, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
We must do it again. It's been fascinating, and thank you so much for your time and sharing all your knowledge. It's
beautiful. And let me know if you have some other big guest on, and I'll link in to watch you interview somebody else. Okay,
sure, we'll do that. Okay, thank you for today, and thank everyone, and catch up with you soon.
Okay. Have a
Take
good
care.
day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.